Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. We are literally on episode 110. 110 times we have shown up today. Well, not today, but at the show in order to do the news. 110 times. I appreciate all of you for it. We've been having some really big shows and we have blown past 40K. We're over 41K at this point. The next stop is 50K. We are going to have to do something for 50K. I don't know what that something is. We are going to have to do something for 50K. That is an astonishing number, at least in my mind, anyway. I've been doing this for a while. I've been stuck at 30K for a long time. So the fact that we're moving is fantastic. And I appreciate all of you for it. I mean, the fact is, couldn't do it without all of you. Shout out to the chat. Speaking of that, Rafe, shout out to you. Holly Horn, shout out to you. Skeptical Jerk, Diane Thomas, all of you, shout out. Susie Potatoes. Susie Potatoes, that's a hell of a name. No, guys, thank you for joining me, man. Fantastic show for you today. Mark Sloboda is going to be here first thing in the morning. I have an interview that I take with Morandi that took place over the weekend. I had to upload that interview. In fact, that's what took me so long. I had to cut part of that interview because part of the interview, him and I were just talking. And he was like, wait a minute, am I being interviewed? It's like, yes, you're being interviewed. Oh, we have to start this over. I had to get to that part in order to get that right. So that is going to come up. I also have two new guests for this show, Lauren Fix and Colleen Rowley. So the Epstein files apparently were released by Pam Bondi, and people are still annoyed. People are still annoyed. What people wanted were the Johns. Where are the Johns? Where are the Johns? Where are the people who, did bad things? Let's say it that way. And when people weren't getting the list of people who were doing bad things, their response was, well, wait a minute. You told us you were going to release the files. I did not know this, but the government can't release the files. I did not know that. And what I mean by that is there's a law, apparently, that prevents the federal government from putting out information like that. And so we're not going to get names either way. We're not going to get names either way. I also have Lauren Fix, and that name is fantastic because she's a car person with the last name of Fix. It's just great irony. Also in the news, Syria is just on fire. Syria is just on fire. And Tariffs, Jelani, has come out and said, we're going to have an independent commission to figure out why are the coastal regions rebelled, ignoring the fact that they have been murdering women and children the entire time. It's astonishing. Turkey has sent military in order to try to quell the area. Jelani and his terrorists have been trying to quell the uprising. And up to this point, the chaos is still going on. Russia allowed thousands into their military base for protection against Jelani and his gang of terrorists. Just wow. Just absolutely wow. In Kursk, you have a situation where they have fundamentally collapsed and the Ukrainian military. Oh, Mark. Give me 1 second. Mark is late. I didn't think I know why. Daylight savings time is here. Yes. So on the radio show, when we have daylight saving time, there's always an issue. There's always an issue. We break continuity with other countries when we have a daylight savings times. Mark is a Moscow. Because Mark is a Moscow, I strongly suspect that from his point of view, it is not 7:15. Oh, I think Mark is going to be late, or Mark is not going to show up. Because, in the United States, we sprung forward. So when it was, let's say last week at 7:15, it was a different time in Moscow. Now it is 7:15, and I strongly suspect that Mark thinks it's 6:15. I could be wrong. But Mark is usually like a clock in regards to his tardiness, meaning he's usually on time. And the fact that he is not here, I strongly suspect that what is going on is he is getting the time wrong because we've had daylight savings time. I sent him the link saying, hey, Mark, daylight savings time. It is 7:15 now. I think he's going to miss. I think he's going to miss it. I can feel it. I can feel it in my bones. He is going to miss this interview. Look, I will say this. There has been a fundamental collapse of the Ukrainian military in Kursk. Now, I have had this conversation before. CNN has been trash on this issue. They have been utterly and completely trash. Now, when Ukraine first went into Kursk, the entire point was in order to get the Kursk power plant. That was their goal. That was their objective. If we get the power plant, we will have something to exchange, maybe for their power plant. The thought was that they were going to get to the power plant within a few days. Not only did they not get to the power plant, they got bogged down pretty quickly in Kursk, and bogged down to the point where they were just frozen. And then the objective became something different. It was like, okay, we're not going to get to the power plant. Fair enough. We will hold. And when we hold, maybe we could get something out of the Russians later on in some negotiation that takes place into the future. That was the thought. The people in the media, CNN, other media organizations in the United States, they said, this is fantastic. We are able, Zelensky, the new Churchill, has done something remarkable. He's invaded Russia. And in invading Russia, he's humiliated Putin. And he's shown that he still has the chutzpah to wage this war. That's what they were saying on CNN and all of these media channels in the United States. I came on and said, this is embarrassing for Russia. Yes, that's true. I said, but those forces are going to either be killed or pushed out. There's no two ways between it. Russia's not going to negotiate, which means those people are all going to die. Or they're going to leave. One or the other. And as time went on, the Russian military, did not pull anybody from other parts of the battlefield. So that didn't happen. And on top of not pulling forces from the battlefield, was able to stop the advance of the Ukrainian military in Kursk and whittle away and push them back further and further and further. And it was so bad, meaning in regards to the destruction to the Ukrainian military that was in Kursk, the thought was, oh, fair enough. The thought was, I need to send Garland this link. I'm sorry. It broke my concentration. The thought ended up being, okay, well, when we push these people out, they were going to hold on to the territory in order to trade, in order to exchange. That didn't happen. And that just didn't happen. Those people started getting killed. In fact, those people were getting killed to such a degree that people started to think, I wonder if Putin did this on purpose. People actually thought that hey, maybe Putin knew that Ukraine was going to do this. And in knowing that Ukraine was going to do this, Putin allowed this trap to be set. And in allowing this trap to be set, got Ukraine. Now, this is nonsense. I don't believe for a moment that Putin intentionally allowed Ukraine to be invaded. There we are. I don't think he intentionally allowed Ukraine to be invaded, but fair enough. Whether he did or not, Ukraine took its best troops, took those best troops, put them into, and had them invade Kursk. And to make it even worse, pulled them from the front line in order to do so. So they took their best people and threw them into a meat grinder. Fast forward several months later, those people have been slaughtered. Those people have been slaughtered. And it has only gotten worse. And it's gotten to the point recently where Russia liberated 32 settlements over the weekend. Over the last couple of days, they have liberated 32 settlements in Kursk. This has been an unmitigated disaster. An unmitigated disaster. In fact, let's go to part of the story since Mark is not here. Russian servicemen have liberated 32 settlements in the Kursk region since August 6th last year, according to TASS. Well, not 32 over the weekend, but several over the weekend. I said that way. On March 8th through 9th alone, the decisive action of Battle Group North resulted in the liberation of 7 settlements, including Malaya, Lokanaya. I'm not even going to try to pronounce these names. I'm not going to do that to myself. Suffice to say, over the last several days, Ukraine has fundamentally collapsed in the Kursk region. And the remaining soldiers that are there, from my understanding, are effectively surrounded or near being surrounded. Part of the other problem that they have with this, as they pointed out, as the soldiers have pointed out before, if we leave, they're going to follow us. Because in going into Kursk, Ukraine has fundamentally opened up another front. And if you leave that front, the soldiers are not just going to stop. They're going to keep going. So they found themselves stuck in the Kursk region. So they took their best soldiers, invaded Russia. Russia did not pull their forces away. Russia was able to stop them with the forces they were able to cobble together from like reservists and everything else. And once they stopped them, they pushed them. And now it's pushing them out of the Kursk region. So the bargaining chip that Zelensky wanted by holding on to Kursk is now falling apart. And those soldiers have been destroyed. Just astonishing. CNN thought this was great. CNN thought this was great. I'm going to bring my man Garland. Garland apparently was watching the show. He saw Mark was late, daylight savings time. God, man, on the show every year when daylight savings time hit, the guest that was abroad just wouldn't show up. How you doing, Garland?
Doing great. Better than the Ukrainians in Kursk. They are in a bad situation, brother.
Oh, that is an understatement. And, as I was telling the audience, if you remember, CNN thought this was great. This is fantastic. Zelensky, the new Churchill, has shown that he could stick it to Putin by invading the Russian territory. And I remember the day it happened. Because when stuff like this happens, we have to come on air and we have to talk about it. And when you're on like a Russian station, it's like, okay, there's a bit of pressure in order to cover this, to cover it, right? And I remember I came on and I think I did a monologue and I was like, this is humiliating for Putin. That's true. But those people are going to die or those people are going to be pushed out. CNN instead was reporting, this is fantastic. Zelensky has shown himself to be, a military genius. And I'm like, what are these people talking about? All of these soldiers are going to die. Give me your thoughts on this. I mean, it's astonishing.
Well, the thing about it is, it's like the whole war was, to the like the Western press, they were like very zen. You know what I mean? They were in the moment. They never talked about what the long-term plan was. Forget it. Live for today. Today we had a glorious, what appears to be, victory. And you look at it, you're like, yeah, but in the long run, you're going to lose. Yeah, but what about today? We humiliated Putin. You ever notice? It's always something emotional to them. It's never about the actual, the reality of a war. There's planning and there's all these things that happen. It's always Putin was humiliated. Well, Putin's angry. Putin's frightened. And I'm like, they go through like they're doing some psychological, emotional profile of Putin all the time. Never there's no Russian country, in fact. There's never, the Russian military has planned. Putin's humiliated. And in the long run, they went into Russia. They put themselves in the but you know what? Doesn't that kind of right? Like, isn't this kind of an example of the entire conflict? Okay, they went into Kursk and they had they had a brief period of glory, but they were never going to win. That's the whole war. You looked at it, you're like, man, this country's 26 and a half times the size of that country. They got like 5 times the 6, 7, I don't know, whatever times the actual amount of people, not to mention they have an actual military. And this one is a military that was like rebuilt by somebody else.
Right.
We know how to, they never would accept that ultimately everybody knew what the outcome was going to be sooner or later, maybe sooner. But we all know at some point, Ukraine ain't going to win.
Right. What's wild in the reporting, it said Zelensky asked Zelensky when he presented this plan to invade Kursk, okay, what's the second objective? Okay, you invade, great, fair enough. This area is not defended, so that may work. But what do you do next? And there was no answer. And apparently Zelensky went to, I think, Syrsky. It might have been Syrsky, I forget which one. But asked him also, he was like, what's plan B? There was never a plan B. And so Zelensky was like, okay, this is a bad idea. And he was exiled to the UK. Now, he was exiled to the UK for political reasons also, but apparently there was a disagreement over this invasion because from Zelensky's point of view, there is no military significance to what you're doing. As a propaganda exercise, great. But to your point, much of this war has been a propaganda exercise. And I understand why. So if you're Zelensky and you are not building the majority of your military, you're getting bullets, weapons, guns, you're getting all of this equipment, and it's from a mismatch of all of these different countries in Europe. Okay, then that means that you're stuck with this device of not just pursuing a military objective, but you also need to show your Western backers that you're in the fight, that you're active, that you're moving, which means that a lot of what you're doing is also not just for military necessity, but for propagandistic purposes in order to ensure that the weapons, the bullets, the guns, those things keep coming in. Because the moment, as we've seen, by the way, that the countries start to say, okay, you've lost. They don't want to give you anything. I don't want to put good money after bad. And so Zelensky has to continuously do these propagandistic exercises. Oh, we're going to have an offensive. Here's our video showing that we're going to do an offensive, which who the hell does that? Who prefaces that an offensive is coming for 3 months, an offensive is coming, and Russia says, okay, we need to build about offensives for this offensive that's going to come at some point. Who does that? You do that if part of your objective in fighting the war is propaganda. We need to show our Western supporters, our Western backers, our Western masters that we're still fighting and we're still going so they can continue to send us weapons and to continue to send us money. That was a lot of this war. But the reality of it is, when you're fighting a war, sometimes you back up. Sometimes you don't tell people what you're doing because you don't want them to know. This war has been fundamentally different in the way that it was fought. And unfortunately, for some of the best fighters in Ukraine, Kursk was a propaganda exercise.
And to some extent, you know, and what here's what I was thinking about when you were talking: tactics with no objective. You know, usually the objective is we're going to win, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And these tactics, individual tactics, will do this, and they'll get us there, right? You know, they never had any of that. They had tactics, but they never ultimately had an objective. And, you know, at one point, I remember before Biden left, he said something, I forgot what it was, but it made it obvious that he never thought they could win, which was obvious. No, everybody knew. They would say that they thought they could win, but they couldn't. So you had, this is like, the world should learn about proxy wars from this. You know what I mean? When you have somebody saying, okay, because what was the original objective? To get the war started, to put 25 billion sanctions on Russia, and then Russia would collapse. And when Russia didn't collapse, they didn't have a plan. And from then on, it was, well, we'll do this. Oh, okay, I got an idea. Let's do that. You know, and not only that, you know, too many cooks spoil the soup. You got MI6. Hey, here's a plan. We'll take Kursk. And there's the US. Oh, we got a plan. We'll attack this angle from over here. Oh, so you've got all these people in the background like puppet masters. Let's do this. Let's do that. None of them actually had an end plan. And it seems to me, with a lot of them, they just kind of hated Russia. And so, like, maybe the Brits were quelling their anxiety for the hatred they had for Russia. We really hate Russia. Oh, we hate them. What do you do? Well, we've got this puppet army. We'll fire some storm shadows at those son of a bitches. Fired some storm shadow. That quelled their anxiety for a little while. Then there's Blinken. Well, we hate them too. What do you do? I don't know. Scout missiles. What do you think? Throw some of those at, you know what I mean? They were quelling the anxiety for their hatred for Russia, utilizing this army. That's why I say, one of these days, at the end of this war, the Ukrainians are going to wake up, and it ain't going to be the Russians they're going to be pissed at. One of these days, they're going to wake up and they're going to look back at the West, and they're going to look back at the US, and they're going to say, look what you did to us. You never thought we were going to win. You just used us and threw us up against the wall over and over and over. It cost us literally, because if 1 million are dead, then 3 million are injured.
Yeah.
I believe that one of these days, the Ukrainians, they're going to be really pissed at the people. Because the Russians, like you brought up, the Russians had a deal 1 month in, and it wasn't all that bad a deal, all things considered.
It was essentially Minsk.
Yeah,
I mean, it was essentially Minsk agreements. And keep in mind, in the Minsk agreements, Ukraine, those territories were going to remain under Ukraine. So they might have been more autonomous, but they still were going to be under Ukraine, meaning Ukraine would have been complete under the Minsk agreements. They didn't want the Minsk agreements. They didn't want them. And then, as you point out, when they were filing the Istanbul agreements, they didn't want those either. And so it's like, okay, you don't want the Minsk agreements, which was supposed to stop a war, by the way. You didn't want the Istanbul agreements, which would have stopped the war. Okay, it's like, what do you want me to do with this, right? Like, I hear people, I'm going to play this clip for you. Liberals. This is where liberals are right now. You're going to rip your television off the screen on this video. This is the stuff they're saying on MSNBC.
The person who's watching, who just heard you say Donald Trump is not standing up for Ukraine. What do you say to the person who says, well, I don't care about Ukraine. I want Donald Trump to stand up for America. What do you say to them?
I don't know where you got that. I mean, I don't have time for it.
Yes, but we hear it. We hear it.
Here's the thing. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in a place where you thought the Russians were the good guys? What part of America did you grow up in where they taught you the Russians were the good guys and our allies were the bad guys? That's the flip here that we need to continue to remind people. The Russians are the bad guys. They're raping women. They're killing children. They're bombing cities. The Ukrainians are the noble good guys. In some ways, they're more American than we are over the last couple of years. And we must stand with them in the same way we stood with the Allies in World War II and since this country was founded. This is not just about Ukraine. This is about the core and the integrity of American values.
This guy just said that Ukrainians are more American than Americans, and that fighting Ukraine, like that, the Russians cosmically are the bad guys. Like not even situational, right? Cosmically, they're the bad guys. They're Satan incarnate, And it is noble for us to send billions in order to get all of these people killed. This is the trash commentary, this faux intellectual commentary. All of that was just propaganda. None of that was talking about reality. We grew up believing the Russians were the bad guys and the Ukrainians are more American than Americans. And so we need to fight with Ukraine because Russia is the bad guy. Dude, what are you talking about? I'm going to let you hear that. That is what goes for MSNBC. That is what liberals say to each other. That is what they're brave enough to say online or on TV. The fact that Russia was trying to avoid this war doesn't matter. The fact that there were agreements that Ukraine and the United States broke doesn't matter. The fact that they overthrew the Ukrainian government, meaning us, in 2014 doesn't matter. None of that stuff matters to him. He may not even know that stuff, right? His thing is Russia's evil. Us fighting the Russians is a cosmic good. And so, we need to continuously give Ukraine money in the war that they lost. And now that they're trying to get kids into the war, we should now support them in getting kids into the war that they've lost. This incompetent Neanderthal is out here telling other liberals this nonsense. This fathead is out there is telling people this. Just astonishing. That is astonishing that is the stuff that they're telling each other. Give me a take on this, Garland.
You know what it made me think about? I was watching Matt Taibbi a while back, and he was saying that when he was looking into some stuff that these censors were doing, when they were doing all this censorship online, and he said, when you read what they said, that's essentially what they said. It wasn't about the content. You had to censor this person who was saying something. It was about, well, those are the bad guys and we're the good guys. So when they would censor you, Jamal, if you put something up about an actual factual tweet about something Russia or whoever it was they didn't like, their position as they were censoring your tweets or whatever was, well, Jamal's one of the bad guys, so his tweet has to go down. Then somebody else, a NAFO troll or something, puts up, he's one of the good guys, so his tweet has to stay up. It is the intellectual, moral, and philosophical bankruptcy of modern day liberalism. You and I are people who we like to nuance things. I might not like that something is true, right? But I might not like it. It may go up against everything that I believe in. If it's true, what am I going to do about it? I'm going to read it. I keep saying there's things that Trump is doing. I'm like a working class person. I believe in the working class. When he fires a bunch of people over at the Department of Interior, I'm 100% opposed to that. It outrages me. When he tries to stop a war, I'm 100% in favor of that. That's wonderful. Donald Trump's not a good guy or a bad guy. You don't judge the people. You judge the actions. And that is the bankruptcy of modern day liberalism that just says the arrogance. We determine who the good guys or bad guys are. And we assign actions based on not what, but whom. I remember another thing, an article in the Washington Post, and what they basically said when they did this research, and they would ask people questions and then say who said it. And what they found out was most Americans make their decisions on whether they support political policies on who said it. And I used to play that game. I'd say to somebody when Obama was in, I'd say, what do you think about when Reagan said so-and-so? And they'd say, it was great. It was brilliant. It was wonderful. And I'd say, oh, my bad. That wasn't Reagan. That was Obama. And they go, oh, shit. And I do it the opposite, just to play with somebody and just to demonstrate to them, you don't really care what's said. You only care who said it. And that's where they are. Remember George Bush, George W., you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. It doesn't matter who does what. It just matters who does it. And that's where that's why I keep saying the Democratic Party today is the Republican Party of George W. Bush, this Manichaean. It is this, the Manichaean philosophy is in the universe, there's two forces, absolute good and absolute evil. And there's a constant war between absolute good and absolute evil. And of course, everybody that always says, now, of course, I'm on the side of absolute good. It's just pathetic. It's worse than childlike to watch that guy.
Yeah. It's something you've said in the past too. This idea that liberals are so self-righteous. And if you're that self-righteous, then how can you ever do anything wrong? Like, meaning, whatever position I take, I am, by definition, self-righteous. I know I'm right. And because I know I'm right, morally, ethically, I'm superior, then the positions that I effectively take have to be, by definition, right and wrong. Like, it's so childish, right? Like, and again, I used to be the way too. Like, when I used to look at this stuff, oh, that guy said this. And then somewhere along the way, I've gotten so cynical where I have no expectation that any of these people are good. Like, from my point of view, all of these people are bad. And so the only thing I'm ever going to get out of this is, okay, there are going to be things I get that I want, and there are going to be most things that I get that I don't want. And so when it's something that I want, I can say, this is good. I like this. This is a good thing. Even if it's coming from somebody who I consider to be bad, if that makes sense. Like, in their minds, though, that's not the way they process this. They process. And honestly, if it was Joe Biden doing this, he'd be fine. Let's be honest, right? If it was Joe Biden who decided, okay, I'm going to unravel this, etc., that dome head would have no issue. I strongly suspect that at 3 a.m. between him and his God, his issue is Donald Trump is making peace. Donald Trump is bad. So peace, by definition, is bad because it's coming out of Donald Trump, which is so childish that it breaks the cosmos in how childish it is. That guy has an intellectual efficacy of a child playing in shit. Let's be honest. He doesn't know anything about this. He just knows Russia's bad, Putin is bad, and so we must keep sending money to a losing war. It doesn't even register to him that Ukraine is lost. It doesn't even register. It doesn't register that they're talking about, let's send in our kids to a war that we've lost. That doesn't register. That doesn't even matter. And you think to yourself, how can that not matter? Like, even if I don't like, let's say that everything he's saying is right. Let's pretend for the moment that Russia is the bad guy in this. Let's pretend that, this is the war against good and evil. You've lost that war. You've lost that war. Like, even if you don't like it, you've lost that war. And the fact that you've lost that war, so what do you do now that you've lost the war? Do you keep sending money into a losing war? Do you keep sending all of these people to die in a losing war? In his mind, the answer is yes. I think that's outrageous. Like, yes, my mom asked me one day, why don't you like Zelensky? And as I was putting out, he got all these people killed. And I see this in liberals, where in their minds, it's, well, we must keep fighting against evil, even if we've already lost. And it's like, you would think that there would be some measure where you say, okay, we've lost this war. And it is a wrong to continuously send people into a war that we've already lost. It doesn't register. I don't understand why it doesn't register. Like, I got to be honest. I am honestly, like, confused by why that doesn't matter. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well, even the woman before, I mean, if you go to her first statement, quite frequently, she says, use the word stand up for Ukraine, right? That's a metaphor. That's right. It's a metaphor. We're not literally sitting down and we're going to stand up on our feet for Ukraine. She means metaphorically stand up for Ukraine. So even like people like us will ask this. What do you mean by stand up for Ukraine? You know what I mean? When you say, I'm going to stand up for Ukraine, my first question is, what do you mean by stand up for Ukraine? Does that mean, here's the way it sounds to me, we should act in the best interest of Ukraine? Because if you delve into her statement that says stand up for Ukraine, I have to interpret that to mean act in the best interest of Ukraine. Now we've got an argument, because I'm arguing if Ukraine is facing a superior foe, then the best interest of Ukraine is to stop the fight, because they're going to get the hell beat out of them. If I'm standing there and Mike Tyson's pummeling me, we got to act in the best interest of Garland. That means do whatever you can do to get him out of that ring, because Mike Tyson's going to kill him. Right? So to say that you continue fighting Garland, what are you doing? I'm standing up for Garland. Continue. Keep your face in front of Mike Tyson's fist so he can continue to pummel you. So the whole thing is intellectually bankrupt, because they use these think about this conversation. You and I will have a nuanced conversation. Well, we got to start with who's at fault, who's right and wrong. We've got to take this thing apart so we can determine what the moral position is. Who's right and who's wrong. Morally, we got to discuss that. And then we got to take the physical, kinetically, who can win, who can't. That's our discussion, right? Who's right, who's wrong, using a historical context. Is Ukraine even acting on its own behalf? Does it have agency? We can argue no, it's a proxy war. Okay, that's what we would do. The first woman says, stand up for Ukraine. It's metaphor, means nothing. The next guy goes, the Russians are the bad guys and these guys are the good guys. How do you know that, sir? That's what I learned for years when I was a child. He goes to talk about. That's what we learned when I was a child. Back during the Cold War, they told us the Russians were bad. No, they didn't. They said the Soviet Union was bad. They didn't say the Russians were bad. They said the Soviet Union was bad. In fact, the Soviet Union doesn't exist, and it wasn't evil then. That was nothing but propaganda then, and it is now. So it's back then, I was told this, and I can't change now. I can't think for myself and look at it and say, maybe I was lied to by the government. The whole thing is just intellectually bankrupt. Metaphors, good versus bad, no actual technical, political, geopolitical conversation about the details of this thing. No, hey, what about when you told the Soviet Union then that you wouldn't move 1 inch forward towards that you wouldn't expand NATO, all of the conversations that we have, but they can't have those conversations.
Yeah.
Because if they have those conversations, the rest of that bull crap they're doing collapses in minutes. And one last thing. And that's why people aren't watching that crap anymore. That's why people are rapidly flooding into alternative spheres such as this, because they want to hear a conversation with people that sound like they got a brain instead of these brain dead idiots using metaphors and the good guys versus the bad guys. People are sick of that crap.
Well, and there's this. This is CNN, I believe. Listen to what he says here. Okay, it's just a graphic. So CNN asks the question, is Russia an ally or an enemy? In 2023, 64% said they were an enemy. In 2025, 34% said they were an enemy. A 30% drop in the number of people that consider Russia an enemy just within a year or 2 years. I think on some level, this explains why Democrats are on the outs. Because on all of these issues, they seem to be out of sync with the rest of the country. I mean, 34% saying they're an enemy. Okay, I don't think the majority loves Russia. I don't think that. The propaganda runs deep in regards to, like she said, Cold War and all that stuff. But you're getting more people saying, okay, well, they're not an enemy of us. And it seems that there seems to be a turn. Now, I know a lot of those people are Republicans. I suspect that the rest of them are liberals. The entire 34% are probably liberals. But it does seem to be a shift in the way that the American public is thinking about this, thinking about the war, thinking about Zelensky, whereas liberals haven't changed. They just haven't changed. They're standing still. It's so aggravating to me that these people are doing this. And I get the sense that it begins and ends with Trump. I think it begins and ends with Trump. And Tulsi Gabbard is another really good example of this. If you remember, at her confirmation hearing, Tulsi Gabbard brings up Syria. She brings up the Syrian war. She brings up the fact that we're helping terrorists. And the Democrat was like, yeah, I get all that. I get all that. But why'd you say it? Like, meaning, I accept that you talking about Obama trying to overthrow the Syrian government. I accept it's true. That we were helping terrorists. I accept that's true. That we have a terrorist in there now. I accept that's true. That we help put them in. I accept all that. Why'd you say it? That was such an astonishing exchange to me, because it means, look, we know what's happening, but we have policy that we are implementing. And regardless of what we do, regardless of how bad it is, keep your mouth shut. You're not supposed to say it. That's the issue. I understand that you know it, but you're not supposed to go on CNN and point it out. You're not supposed to point this out. This is not stuff that you're supposed to actually say. That's mind-blowing when you think about it.
Um,
They know what's going on.
it's almost like, how are we going to dupe the American people if you tell them something that's true? You know what I mean? That's the way I heard it. Like, yeah. We know that amongst us, but the dupes out there, they're not supposed to hear these kinds of things. And we all know the rules that we can internally know what's true. But if it's something that benefits us, we'll tell them the truth. Other than that, we just lie to them about all of this stuff in case for whatever reason we want to do. And Tulsi wasn't buying it. And what's happened is this: the Democrats have retreated into this world where they're not allowed to have any kind of a conversation of note with the American people. And people have kind of picked up on it. Meanwhile, all this, here's the thing about it: all this stuff on the back channels of the internet, such as us, you know what I mean, or whoever, Jimmy Dore or Glenn Greenwald, whoever, you know what I mean. I could name channel after channel, the Duran, whatever, are having conversations. We don't all agree on everything, right? There's things we don't agree on, but we're having conversations that are genuine, honest conversations. And a lot of times, even if we disagree, we start with the same set of facts. This is true, this is true, this is true. And then we go in different directions with it, which is fine, which I just keep, every time I look at that kind of stuff, I just think, no wonder alternative media is growing, because people want an intellectual conversation. And these are people who the only thing they know is how that inside game is played. There's an esoteric conversation, right? An internal conversation that they have, and then the exoteric conversation, or the cover story. I think that's the term I was looking for. We got to go with the cover story. We can't have the internal conversation in front of all of the dupes. And things are changing. And now that's the thing about it is this. I keep saying, at the rate the Democrats are going, man, unless something dramatic happens, the midterms are not going to be kind to them. People don't want to hear this crap. Nobody's watching. Yeah, if I watched MSNBC, when I turned that on, I'd never watch it again. I would feel like they were insulting my intelligence to say to me, it's the good guys and the bad guys. That's the way I was brought up to believe. And but yet, you want to tell me that some guy, just because he has a camouflage camouflage hat and a pickup truck and a Trump sign on, oh, that guy's my enemy. Well, you know what? That guy knows more about the truth and the facts now about reality, about Syria, or about Kursk and Kharkov and Kiev. The guy with the camouflage hat on and the pickup truck and the Trump sticker on his pickup truck knows a hell of a lot more about geopolitics than those people. That's factual.
Can we talk about Syria real quick?
Yes. Oh my God.
I just sat here and watched a video of a terrorist that Israel, Turkey, and the United States backed physically beat a 7-year-old, punching, kicking a 7-year-old. A cute little girl. I can't even show the video. I would love to show it.
Oh no, I can't watch them. I can't even watch that stuff. They're all over. I know what you're talking about. I can't handle them.
We said when this happened, these are terrorists, and they are going to go and they're going to murder women and children, because it's what they did when they invaded Syria before. Meaning when Assad, Russia, Iran pushed back the terrorists that we were backing, they were doing this, killings, murders, all of these things. So the population who was in Syria fully understood what was happening when Turkey helped these terrorists take over the country and knock over the country. They knew, all of us knew, all of us said, they are going to go on a killing spree for minorities in the country. And people kept telling us, you're getting it wrong. These are freedom fighters. They're Syrians who are just taking back Syria from this brutal, bloody dictator Assad. And this is a new Syria that is coming into play. Our producer, Leif, Lebanese and Syrian ethnicity. His family in Syria. And when Syria collapsed, I immediately hit him up and said, hey, is everything going all right? Like, is your family okay? He said, they are terrified. They're terrified what's coming. And everybody kept saying, nope, Jelani, he's in a suit now. And because he's in a suit, he's no longer a head chopper in the way that he used to chop off heads. And Syria is going to be somehow better and different. And we kept saying, these are terrorists. Terrorists are terrorists. They're going to do what terrorists do. They are hateful extremists that hate all of those minority communities. And even when they first took over, there were killings, there were murders, people were being dragged through the streets by jeeps and trucks. And we were pointing that out saying, this is just the beginning. Because they have done this over the course of these last several months since Syria has collapsed, meaning killings, murders, etc., there's an uprising in Latakia and some of the other coastal regions. HTS and its band of terrorists have gone out in killings and reprisals. That video where they are beating a child, that is hard to process. A grown man, grown men, literally punching a kid with all of their might. And the kid is falling, the kid gets up, they punch him again, they say, hey, get up, get up. They hit the kid again. And these videos are all over the place. I can show you videos of people being shot. I can show you videos of people being put up against the walls. This is exactly what we said was going to happen. And it is now happening. Hillary Clinton, the gift that keeps on giving, put out this. This was leaked. I love how all this stuff gets leaked. WikiLeaks. Hillary Clinton email Israeli intelligence says collapse of Syria will spark a Sunni Shiite war that will benefit Israel. Right here, it says would lose its only ally in the Middle East and would isolate, I guess they're saying Iran. At the same time, the fall of the House of Assad could well ignite a sectarian war between Shiites and the majority Sunnis of the region, drawing in Iran, which, in the view of Israel commanders, would not be a bad thing for Israel and its Western allies. This is the shit that Hillary Clinton thinks of. And when people, when Tulsi Gabbard said she was like a demon or something like that, that's why. Tulsi Gabbard wasn't saying that out of no reason. It's stuff like this. She doesn't care that these minority populations are getting slaughtered. She doesn't care. And many of the people that were cheering this on don't care that these people are getting slaughtered. And if you remember, the mainstream media whitewashed all of it. Well, they can't anymore. It's too in their face. Give me your take on this, and I'll close it on this.
A couple of things. One is, it reminds me of Jake Sullivan's Cable. Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria.
Yes.
These people, and this happened. A lot of people felt as though after Trump won, there were a number of things that the Biden administration was doing, before Trump got in, and that this was one of them. One of the things they had to do was overthrow Syria before Trump got in, right? If we remember, Tulsi Gabbard was talking about this at her confirmation hearing, saying this guy's a terrorist. There's terrorists in charge of Syria, right? Oh, you know who really, now you look back, they went after Tulsi Gabbard all this time about Syria. She told them, she says, you lied about weapons of mass destruction. You talked to Assad. Hey, what's wrong with talking to Assad? She has been really shown that she was right all along about Syria. And she said, these people are terrorists. We put terrorists in charge of Syria. This is Joe Biden, the blood on this man's hand.
Yes.
If this guy ain't some kind of a Hitler figure, they're telling Trump was Hitler. A million dead and at least, and millions injured and wounded in Syria. A genocide in Gaza, overthrew this government, and now there's literally another genocide by the terrorists that he helped to put in place. And they celebrated the Joe Biden sphere, the Biden, everybody, the Biden, oh, wonderful, blah, blah, blah. What the history of what this guy did to the world. If I've had people say, well, do you think Trump's the worst president? And I said, Joe Biden, if you take the worst 10 presidents and put them all together, Joe Biden's twice as worse as all of them. He's unbelievable. This is another, some more Joe Biden's handiwork. Unbelievable to watch what we're seeing now.
He is going to bust hell wide open. God, I hope a hell exists. Yeah. And I hope he burns in it. And then what makes it so bad is he's so dementia riddled that he doesn't even quite understand the significance of what he has done. I hope he gets hit in the head with a rock. It is hard to process, what these guys, the chaos that they wreak around the globe, and they just don't care. There's no consequences. George Bush is out there finger painting right now. Joe Biden is going to go to some retirement home and eat applesauce and has his wife changing. In fact, she may be changing his diaper right now as we speak. I mean, like, but they don't get the chaos that they create around the globe. And maybe they do get it. They just don't care. I don't know.
You know what else? One other thing. And all these liberals are running around. I had somebody ask me this. In hindsight, Garland, don't you think we'd have been better off if Kamala won? No! I think we'd have been dead as a doornail. We'd have been nuked, and God only knows what would happen. I don't know anybody that didn't vote for Kamala or voted for Trump who's saying, in hindsight, I should have voted for these friggin' lunatic, terrorist-supporting, genocidal, nuclear weapons-wielding monsters. Unbelievable. As bad as Trump is, I'm not saying Trump is good. There's at least in foreign policy, there is no comparison to the Blinken-Sullivan administration.
Liberals are cockroaches.
Oh my God.
They're fucking rats. I mean, they back the shit. And to make it even worse, Trump and the UN, Russia, have gone to the UN for a Security Council meeting over what's taking place in Syria. And of course, you have a liberal asshole comes out and says, he's taking the position of Russia and Iran. It's like, yo, your fucking mind. Like the notion that Russia and the US said, hey, this is bad. They're killing all of these minorities. Like, this is outrageous. And a liberal, random asshole online, some cockroach comes out and says, I can't believe that the US is helping and taking the Russian position on minorities getting slaughtered in Syria. This is the way they are. This is what they think.
They're who? They don't care what's being done. You notice that? It always comes back to that. How can you take position of the bad guys? We don't care what they're doing. We don't care what's happening. We don't care if it's a genocide going on. If the bad guys are opposed to the genocide, then we got to be in favor of it. If the bad guys are in favor of the genocide, then we got to be opposed to it. The liberals now, they don't even exist. They are, let's face it, the term that's been used for extremists, reactionaries. That's all the liberals are. They react to what their perceived adversaries are doing, and whatever their perceived adversaries are doing, I don't care what it is, they oppose it. It's sickening.
These Neanderthals.
They're done.
They're disgusting. Garland, deeply appreciate it. Mark is going to probably see it and be like, oh, right, daylight savings time. Every year during daylight savings time, it never fail. Our guests would just miss the shows, like, especially if they were abroad. Oh, they would miss it. I think it was one show, like 2 or 3 guests missed and stuff like that. Thank you for this, man. All right, Garland Nixon, part of the Garland Nixon Show, political analyst, great friend of the show. You can catch Garland on the Garland Nixon Show on YouTube. Definitely check him out. The man is fantastic. Awesome guest on that show.
And if I'm not mistaken, according to my calendar, you and I are going to be on today from 4 to 5 p.m.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
We will be back, everyone. We will be back.
Thanks, my man. I appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Be safe.
Bye.
I wish I could show you that video. I can't show. YouTube will strike this channel down in a heartbeat if I show that video. It is a 7-year-old child with terrorists surrounding her. She has no shoes on. She's terrified. And they're punching her with every bit of might that they can hit her with. They tell her to get up, and they hit her again. They kept doing it. And I would not be shocked if they kill that girl at the end of the video. This is what is happening in Syria right now. This is the things that liberals back. This is the things that all of these people, for whatever particular reason, thought was a great idea. And the fact that Russia and the US are saying, hey, this is kind of outrageous that this is happening. Maybe we shouldn't let this happen. Maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe the terrorists that we helped put into the position of being in charge of Syria, maybe that wasn't a good idea either. Off the table. The fact that Trump and Russia are going to the UN saying, hey, maybe we should do something about this. That is by definition bad because it comes out of Trump. They're out of their minds. They're out of their minds. Joe Biden created chaos all across the globe. His presidency set the globe on fire, literally. And in their minds, no issue. No issue. So Joe Biden was the one that did it. Disgusting. Completely and entirely disgusting. And by the way, me saying that doesn't mean that Donald Trump is an angel. I know in this country, because we have two political parties, trashing one in people's minds means that you like the other. As I told you, I think all of them are bad. I think all of them are evil. I don't believe that there are any good guys in the situation. I don't think that's cynical. I think that's just being honest. And for me, when it's something that I get that I like, because I consider all of them bad, I just consider I like this. There's nothing else to it. I like this. I like that we're ending a war. I think that is a good thing. I typically don't get even that. So the fact that I get it, I like it. But that's very specific to the war. The moment that we move to another issue, I'm probably going to be against that particular person who is ending the war. I don't get what I want out of this. So I want to show Morandi. That's Morandi. He was nice enough to come on the show yesterday. I will tell you, I had all sorts of tech issues yesterday. It was a mess. It was a mess. I had to go buy another mic. Come to find out it wasn't the mic. Come to find out it was the update. The update effectively damaged the computer. To say it was a mess is an understatement. But I'm going to introduce him. Professor Saeed Mohammed Morandi. He is a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. And I'm going to let this clip play out. We got into an interview on Donald Trump and some of the things that Donald Trump has been saying. And just to preface this, Trump has been saying kind of two things at once. In one sense, he's like, yeah, I want to negotiate. But in another sense, he says stuff like this.
Wow.
I hope that Iran, and I've written him a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them.
Wow.
Trump is out of his mind on this. Yeah, it may be bad militarily for Iran, but to act like it's going to be a cakewalk for the United States, he's out of his mind. The United States lost the war in Iraq. And yes, you were able to beat them in the sense of the military sense, but it went to shit within a few years after that. Iran is like 3 times the size of Iraq, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is just chaos. If we attack Iran, A, they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz. B, they're going to launch those missiles and destroy Israel. You have a restraint currently because there's this kind of standoff. When that standoff goes away, even if you can damage Iran, they can also damage you. And for the president who said, I want to end wars, not start wars, this, saber rattle, it's a pointless endeavor. When he does this, he also says, well, I want to come up with a new deal for the JCPOA, which is pretty ironic since Trump was the one who killed the JCPOA. He is doing this typical two-step of bellicosity with this notion of, hey, let's also make a deal. The problem with that is that many countries are not going to make a deal with you on those terms. You're not dealing with a weak Europe or a weak Canada. You're dealing with a country that has all sorts of trade relationships around the globe, has a decent military, and is a huge country. I think they have like 80 million people or something. This is not a conflict that you want. That's my point. And yet, he is bellyaching. I strongly suspect that the situation is similar to that with Russia, where Russia had to effectively show, don't F with us. The only reason Donald Trump is trying to make a deal with Russia now is because we lost the war. If it wasn't for us losing the war, this deal may not be on the table. This is my interview with Professor Marandi. Shout out to him for being patient with my tech issues. I'm going to play it in its entirety. I am joined with Professor Mohammed Marandi. He is a good friend of the show. I appreciate him for joining me, especially with all the tech issues that we're having. I am on my cell phone because I'm having tech issues. Professor, thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate me on the show.
Thank you for having me. Just so that your viewers know why we're laughing, you were interviewing me for the last 10, 15 minutes, but I thought we were just having a conversation. And then I realized that this was an interview, and so we just restarted.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I'm sorry. I didn't. That's on me. That's on me. The reason I put you on. So there was a clip that was floating around on Twitter where Pezeshkian, well, the caption of the clip was Pezeshkian is angry at the Ayatollah because he wants to effectively make a deal, whereas Ayatollah does not want to have any deals under a bullying of Donald Trump. And the clip was effectively saying that he was angry. Now, you pointed out to me that is not the context of the clip, that this is not what is taking place in this clip. So give me your take on what is going on in that clip, just so the audience will understand. I'm going to play that at a different time. Mark Sloboda is here. Mark, thank you for joining me. International Relations and Security Analyst, Mark Sloboda. How you doing, Mark?
Jamaro, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And my apologies for the time distortion effect.
It is perfectly fine. I understand. When it first happened, I was like, it's daylight savings time. I didn't know as soon as it happened, like, it's daylight savings time. No, man, thank you for joining me, Mark. I need to start with Russia, and let's start with Kursk. There seems to have been a complete and utter collapse of the Ukrainian military in the Kursk region. And apparently they've liberated, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 7 different settlements over that time period. There was this astonishing pipe thing in Sudzha, apparently where the Russian soldiers went through a pipe and attacked the Ukrainian military from the pipe. Again, just mind-blowing military maneuvers on this. What is happening in Kursk right now? How much of Kursk is even left? From my understanding, there's some parts of Kursk where Russia has gotten to the border, in which case they are going to continue to move.
Yeah.
What's happening? Give us some context.
Okay, so to say that there has been a complete collapse of the Ukrainian military position in we used to call it the Kursk incursion. Now it's just better to call it the Sudzha pocket, because that has been all that's left of it. That's not true. It hasn't been a complete collapse, but there has been a major collapse, right? Of the Kiev regime forces positions to the north of Sudzha, right? And down into Sudzha itself. That it could end up within another week or two, possibly, right? That's an optimistic take of rolling up the entire thing, right? Because they've suffered a huge loss. Russia has a lot of momentum. But to say that right now the entire thing is gone would be, technically incorrect. So, back last fall, the Kiev regime launched their incursion into the Kursk region, almost certainly directed towards the Kursk nuclear power plant, and possibly a storage of tactical nuclear weapons that is also strongly rumored to be in the area as well. Now, other than that, the Kursk region was a backwater of the front, right? Very light defenses there, because other than that nuclear power plant, there's nothing there, right? There's nothing of any strategic value. It's literally lots of thick forests, small rivers, and small hamlets, right? So when they launched this incursion, it seemed to come as a bit of a surprise. There's some indication that Russia may have known about it beforehand and allowed it to occur because they viewed it as a strategic blunder of
Do you buy that? I've heard people make that argument.
I really don't know what to say, because it has to be said, if that is true, then several thousand Russian people were sacrificed, civilians were sacrificed as bait.
Which is why I don't believe it.
Right. So I can't I can't make a firm decision, yay or nay. There's a lot of conflicting information or I should say, there's a complete dearth of information that gives me any firm say. But if Russia did not know about it significantly beforehand, then they certainly exploited it to the hilt, right? They certainly exploited it to the hilt. Because essentially all these Kiev regime forces of a military, the Kiev regime's military that has already had already been suffering severe manpower losses that continues to exacerbate, particularly as a result of this. They launched this incursion as an attempt to, on one hand, again, their goal was probably the Kursk nuclear power plant. They never really got close to it, so Russian forces quickly moved in and prevented them from reaching anywhere near that far. And rather than retreat, they dug in and they made it. They created a narrative about, it's diverting forces from the Donbass, which is absolute nonsense, because actually it was the Kiev regime that diverted forces from Donbass, from the Pokrovsk area and the like. And they're the ones with manpower shortages, not Russia. Russia had plenty of reserves that they were able to pull in to seal this thing up and then begin the walk back over the next half a year because they had plenty of reserves. So that's a false narrative. The idea that they were diverting forces is political justification that has no military reality. Then it became the justification that they were going to trade it once peace negotiations began for presumably, I don't know, Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, if they had managed to reach the Kursk nuclear power plant. Okay, Russia made clear from the beginning there would not even be any negotiations until the Kursk region was recovered. There would be no trades. We don't need to make deals because we can take it all back. You can't hold it, right? And you made a strategic blunder by going in there. You came out of far more defendable positions, say in the Kiev area, or forces drawn from the Donbass area where there are actually fortifications. And you came to this forested area with a collection of small hamlets that has no big buildings for you to hide in, right? No place to keep troops, right? Keep them hidden from drones, from artillery, vehicles, and the like, without any fortifications, right? And if you want to keep shoving reinforcements into that, which is what the Kiev regime did for a half a year, then we'll be happy to attrit away these forces here in what essentially became a fire bag, right? An area where Russia was surrounding them on three sides and grinding ever closer to the middle. And they had to keep up a thin supply line using one or two roads up into Russian territory that was, increasingly and ever increasingly under fire. And already by December, about 40% of the Kursk insurgents had been retaken, right? And they had shrunk down to essentially a pocket around the town of Suja. Suja was the largest settlement that the Kiev regime was able to take. It was the largest settlement in the area. And to give you an idea of the size, when I say this area is a backwater, right, with hamlets, it's not a joke. The biggest settlement they were able to take had 4,000 to 5,000 people before the intervention began, right? 4 to 5, that's it, right? That's the biggest area. That's the urban metropolis of this incursion zone. But that was the best they had. So that became the center, the focal point. And as Russia began grinding away, and as of about 2 or 3 weeks ago, they had managed to not only shrink the incursion zone down to a pocket around Suja, but they had been coming in, cutting south to the east and to the west of Suja, narrowing that lifeline right down to the Ukrainian-Russian border, and then actually crossing it. And already for close to a month now, Russian forces have actually been on the Ukrainian side of the border. On the other side of this border here is the Sumy region. And in Sumy, again, it's kind of a provincial territory. There is a fairly large city there, Sumy, right, what the region is named of. But other than that, there's not a whole lot. And then from Sumy, there's a road that goes straight kind of west-southwestish to Kiev, to the Dnieper River and to Kiev. And actually, when Russia first intervened in 2022, this was one of the direction that they moved on Kiev. They came right through Sumy. They didn't even bother taking, they just drove around it. There weren't any serious defenses at the time, and they went right to Kiev. And when they withdrew, they went back this way. So the other argument of what that came very late in the day, like in the last 2 months, was that the Kiev regime couldn't pull forces out of here, because if they did, then Russia would follow them through and attack Kiev. And that much is probably true, right? And Russia may very well have been building up to that, right? Or planning that, as before the incursion began. So that's probably the most legitimate reason they have. But still, they could have been on their side of the border in fortifications rather than out in these hamlets and villages. They suffered terrible losses of Western military equipment and manpower. In fact, they, according to some of the estimates from the Russian Ministry of Defense, they actually lost more Western equipment in Kursk than they lost during the failed 2023 offensive against the Russian defensive lines in Zaporozhye, which gives you a scale of what the Western media, has been. The Western media was at first all excited. Oh, give it to the Russians, take it to the Russians. And then almost immediately there was a little nagging voice in the 4th or 5th paragraph on the 2nd page saying, some analysts question the strategic value of this, right? And we were saying it from the beginning, right? I said it. Okay, short-term tactical success, information warfare success, but ultimately it would be a huge strategic blunder. And that's exactly what it has turned into. So over the last 2 weeks, Russia has been tightening that noose, drawing close around this Suja pocket now, because that's about all that is left. And they had not physically cut the last road supply line into Suja, but they had it under very heavy drone and artillery control, right? Fire control, right? Which means that probably 80 to 90% of anything they tried to send either way got interdicted en route, wounded going one way, and all the ammunition, the supplies, reinforcements coming the other way. So a lot of people have already understood that the writing was on the wall, and the Kiev regime didn't have a lot of other good options, because we are now deeply in the mud season, the Rasputitsa, right? We've had a very warm, unseasonably warm February in Russia, right? Western Russia right now. It's about 10 degrees, right? Above zero. Very unusual for this time of year. And in Ukraine, it's 20 degrees above zero in some places, right? It's 60s, right? In the Fahrenheit weather. So it's just all mud, and you can't use fields. You can't use dirt country roads. You can't use these other routes. You're restricted to asphalt roads, which themselves are increasingly ground up by all these military vehicles and not very good for logistics to begin with. So they're starving them. They're cutting them off, and they've already went down and taken over bits of the Sumy region on the other side. And it was clear that this was going to be closed up. But then over this weekend, Russia accelerated this whole collapse of the Suja pocket with a special forces operation. And this is the third time now they have done a pipeline special forces mission, right? The first one was at Avdiivka, and that was essential for the quick collapse of the defenses in Avdiivka. And then there was another one in Tariffs, and now this is the third one. And the irony here is they used the Druzhba gas pipeline that up until January of this year had still been transporting natural gas to Europe, to Slovakia, to Hungary, right? And it was full of gas and LNG, right, in some cases. So, wasn't available for something like that. But the Kiev regime, did not renew, that didn't try, right? The transit agreement had expired and they weren't going to renew it. And they told Slovakia, suck it up, right? You're not getting any more Russian energy. And Slovakia is swearing back at them. We're giving you electricity, you bastards, so all these words back and forth. And all the time Russians are like, yeah, baby, we got a secret way in now. They haven't even thought it up yet. And here's one of the particular ironies. This pipeline featured in a James Bond film. I believe it was the Living Daylights, I think was the name, with Timothy Dalton, where they used this pipeline to get a defector, which was a Russian cellist who's the actress was Maryam Diabo with blonde hair. And her and James Bond basically used what was supposed to be a cleaning pod and went right through the pipeline out of Russia through the pipeline. So, I mean, in a way, this was already foreseen a few decades ago in a James Bond film. It's hilarious. So this pipeline, this Druzhba pipeline, this natural gas pipeline, is about 4 feet in diameter, right? 1.4 meters, right? So I think that's about 4 feet. Yeah. And parts, I mean, it was a harrowing, right? Complete darkness, very tight, lots of pockets of gas still in there. I have heard that, again, we don't have all the details yet, right? So a lot of it is talk, but that several people died. Several of the people on the Special Forces mission died from gas inhalation. In pockets still in, and the dangers of very severe claustrophobia. But basically, they sent 100 men, a company-sized Special Forces mission, 12 kilometers, right, behind Kiev regime lines, in this Suja pocket, basically through the whole north of the pocket area. A lot of very heavily fought over little hamlets that essentially don't exist anymore. They came out the other side at a place where they could get out of. And now we're getting word that the Kiev regime didn't discover that they had succeeded in this until an hour and a half after they had come out. So they were able to solidify their positions. And then supposedly they got another 2 company-sized groups, so another 200 people. So a total of 300 Russian special forces suddenly popped up behind the Kiev regime's defensive lines, everything above Suja, right? Had been heavily fought over. And so when the Kiev regime discovered this, of course, they started wailing on it with artillery, with drones, with everything they had. And they made claims that they had wiped out the entire force and so forth. That is clearly not the case, right? Now, at least not before they completed their mission, right? I don't know how many people survived at this point. In fact, they themselves, they were operating under strict secrecy. They weren't allowed to tell their families what they had volunteer. This was all volunteer. They weren't allowed to tell their families. They were there was a complete understanding that this was a suicide mission, that it was a one-way ticket, and they went anyway. They made messages to be sent to their families, right? After presumably they died.
This mission was that important, or they were willing to go on a suicide mission in order to accomplish it?
That's not fathomable to you and me sitting in our
armchairs. It's not. I mean, look, it's one thing.
This is Russian territory. This is unquestioned Russian territory, and they were willing to risk, above and beyond. But these are Russian Spetsnaz, right? This is Akhmat Special Forces. These guys are, there are people in the U.S. Special Forces who would go on missions like this too.
No, I accept that. I guess my thought is, look, I accept that when the mission is of massive importance, I need to save the world. I need to save the country. Okay, fair enough. I get that. Was it that important? I mean, let me ask this a different way. What was the main objective of this mission? Let's ask that.
Okay. So the main objective of this mission was exactly accomplished, right? Because when they dropped these 300 forces behind the lines, and then they were discovered, right? And the Kiev regime started wailing on them what they had. All the positions north of that suddenly, and Russia, of course, was jamming a lot of communications, right? Starlink doesn't work in Kursk, and Russia has already demonstrated the ability to at least temporarily locally shut down Starlink anyway, but they were relying on other communications. So there was a lot of confusion that they didn't know what was going on. All they saw was suddenly their own forces were firing behind their position, right? And when they discovered that the Russians were already behind them, that's it. Everyone north of that new Russian Special Forces incursion point, where they emerged from the tunnel, panicked. Right? They fled their positions, and everything basically north of that collapsed, right? In very short order. So like you said, 6 or 7 settlements, and then it built on. And the Kiev regime had already been considering pulling out of some of these areas, right? Not Suja itself, probably for political reasons, but some of the outlying, the settlements around this pocket, because they just couldn't defend them anymore. Supplies were coming in too light. Russians were coming in heavy. It was all a matter of time. And they had actually wired, there's a number of small rivers, right? The Suja River, the Lyolka River, that cross this territory too. And they had actually mined them for, so that if they had to retreat across them, they could blow them up and slow the Russian advancing forces down, buy themselves some more time. Well, the Russians knew this, and the Russians are very good at pontoon bridges at this point. They get them up like that. They don't care. So as part of this, they then sent drones in at these, they already knew, mined bridges behind the Kiev regime forces, and they blew up the bridges. So when some of these forces that were trying to get out now, they came to the Lyolka River, only to find that the bridge that they expected to cross no longer existed. And the Russians were ready. There's video of this. They just annihilated these convoys, right? They just completely annihilated them. A horrible, trap, right? So they walked right into it. The panic, they retreated. They walked into another trap trying to escape. Now, there were some of them that thank all the gods, surrendered, did the smart thing, and the number of POWs were taken. But all in all, the Kiev regime probably lost in excess of 1,000 men in one night, basically. And this is continuing on. We don't know exactly how much advances Russia has taken yet. We haven't gotten all the exact drone evidence or whatever for geopolitical confirmation for mappers. But even the Kiev regime admits, okay, this is a catastrophe. I mean, you've got their interlocutors online calling that all pipelines into European territory must be destroyed because Russians are using them for secret forces to penetrate our countries and the like. Never mind that this was all actual mainland Russian territory and so forth. But a lot of panic, a lot of hair pulling and teeth gnashing and chest beating going on. But I mean, in the West, this is something that you only find out about if you're paying close attention to the conflict, and it will probably be buried deep in an 3 paragraphs in an article on clashes in the Kursk region, right, and stuff like that. In Russia, they're going to make movies about this special forces operation, right? Because this was, and like I said, this is the 3rd one of these, right, that Russia has done, right? Crazy, heroic, special forces stuff going on in this conflict. And it has to be said, some of it's happening on the other side too, but maybe not quite something this dramatic. And it is, I believe that before any, let's say negotiations begin where Russia and Ukraine actually sit down at the table in the coming, short to medium term future, which I'm not entirely sold on, right? I don't necessarily believe that. But let's say that Trump manages to arrange that. He gets Kiev on a leash and they agree to it, and Russia is like, well, okay, no ceasefire, but we'll sit down and talk, right? If that happens, I expect Kursk to already be rolled up by then, right?
Do you think that part of the reason that they accelerated was because they're expecting some kind of peace talks? Basically,
sure,
this is not going to be part of the negotiation.
Yeah, so this has been building for months already, right? It was clear that Russia, they had gotten what they wanted out of the Kursk fire bag, right? The Kiev regime had already suffered so much military damage. They were increasingly using civilian vehicles to transport troops around in the Kursk pocket because they didn't have enough infantry fighting vehicles or APCs left. And when you've done that, it's like, well, what utility is this fire bag for us? Time to start closing it up, right? That had already been ongoing, right? And of course, in the past week, there is all this political noise right now about Trump suspending military and supposedly intelligence aid to the Kiev regime, although there's lots of questions about whether that's actually being done or not. But it definitely creating a heightened sense of panic. Now, what I don't want people to walk away from, because I know this is going to be the mainstream narrative, that, oh, the Kiev regime could have held on to Kursk if it hadn't been for Trump betraying them. No. Don't try to weasel it out of this way. This has been building solidly for 2 or 3 months now. This pocket has ever been tightening. The timing was fortuitous, and the Russia, certainly took advantage of that. It might have helped things along a bit, but I mean, this was Russian, constriction of this pocket and this supply line over months. This was a Russian special forces operation. This wasn't Elon Musk and Kiev regime officials bad-mouthing each other over Twitter. Right. That is not the story about what happened. I know the Western mainstream media is going to do this. I mean, this is going to be the story, right? Trump betrayed Ukraine. They could have won, or they could have held on, right? Because this will be increasingly the narrative going forward from here, right?
By the way, they did that when Republicans were holding the Ukraine funding, and it was like, oh, Ukraine was doing so well until the Republicans held the funding, and all of a sudden it collapsed.
Russia has been on the offensive since the failed Kiev regime. NATO planned a summer offensive towards the Sea of Azov in 2023. Russia has been winning decisively since then, right? They've been on the offensive. Yeah, you have this Kursk fool's crusade, which is what I called it, and what it definitely has turned out to be. And they suffered huge, because not only did they lose people in Kursk, but because they could have used those forces to defend, at least hold on to the Pokrovsk area, Ugledar, the south of Donbass. They could have held on to all of that longer at a much greater cost to the Russian forces, because they would have been fighting in fortified, defendable positions rather than these little forested hamlet areas. For again, no strategic value whatsoever. I mean, pure information war. At least at the end, that's all they had left to fight for. And they're still not pulling troops out, right? I mean, the Kiev regime is doing what it always does. It waits past the point where you can safely withdraw these troops, and then it tries to send an emergency force in to batter open a way briefly to get out as many men as they can, which ultimately, even if it's successful, creates more casualties in getting that hole briefly open to get people out than it would have been if they had just left them there. And now they don't even really have that option, because the supply line is so heavily under fire, and it's strung out into Russian territory, and the Russians are already down. It's essentially a cauldron, right? Not 100% completely a cauldron, but it is essentially, and it's deep into Russian territory, where from the border where Suja still is. And there's no way. They're trying to drag reinforcements again, pulling them from the Donbass, from other areas, to try to keep this pocket open. But morale is really low now on the Kiev regime side, and no one wants to get stuck behind the lines in Russian territory, because the Russians are probably not showing a lot of mercy, right? There are plenty of troops that are successfully surrendering, but I got to say, if you've got neo-Nazi Banderite tattoos and stuff on, you belong to Azov, something like that. I don't know how easily Russian forces are going to recognize that those guys want to surrender.
Yeah, they're going to have a bad day, to put it mildly.
They know.
Well, there's also the propaganda angle, right? When the Kursk incursion first happened, CNN came on with one general after the next saying, this is fantastic. This shows that Zelensky is on it. He is this military genius. He's the new Winston Churchill. And that they still got the pizzazz about him. And I remember being on the show saying, okay, those people are going to get killed or they're going to get pushed out. There's not going to be any two ways about it. I would imagine that from Zelensky's point of view, this is humiliating. And the moment that all of those people,
going to do a lot of political damage to his position at a time when the Trump administration is already trying to push him out, right? This huge fracas in the White House, this news in Politico and elsewhere that Trump is talking to other Ukrainian politicians, the demand for elections, calling Zelensky a dictator, then walking it back a bit, but typical Trump style, I guess, if you want to call it that, contradictions. But he's clearly in a weakening position. And yes, he had this rally where all the Europeans, vice Hungary and Slovakia, stood around him and like, oh, did Daddy US yell at you? Oh, don't worry, we love you. Mommy Europe still loves you, right? Stand strong, be brave, be fearless. We protect you, blah, 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 right? And everyone in the back of their heads, just that conversation that occurred during that week earlier between Trump and Keir Starmer, when Macron and Keir Starmer tried to come and get promises from Trump about security guarantees and the like that Trump wasn't going to give them. Trump at one point interrupted Keir Starmer and said, really? So you can take on the Russians alone, huh? And everyone in the room nervously laughed. right?
Everybody
I
laughed.
think we popped that. You popped that video when we talked about it before.
Yep.
And that's the situation, right? Europe, again, they can drag this out a little longer, but they can't replace either the military or the financial or the intelligence. If the intelligence, even some degree of it, is being withheld, right? You know, some of it may be getting to the Kiev regime anyway. The British may be giving it to them, right? You know, even though Trump told them not to. You know, the other things are happening, but even if it's being disrupted, that's already significant because people really do not understand how important and how big a role U.S. Satellite information, signals intelligence, all of this has been, and to sustaining the Kiev regime for 3 years, right, in the fight. That would have been wrapped up much quicker, right? And we're talking within the first year, almost certainly. But you know, some of us knew the U.S. would get involved, and Elon Musk has been going off on social media, you know, angrily reacting to attacks, pointing out that if his Starlink wasn't used, the Kiev regime, you know, would already be gone, right? And he is only slightly exaggerating the role that Starlink has played because it has been extremely important. They operate their drones off of Starlink, right?
Okay.
And they have a lot of problems, you know, because of Russian electronic warfare and jamming and I mean, Russia has already demonstrated the ability to locally shut down Starlink for that and other purposes, but it's always an arms race, right? Electronic warfare arms race between Musk's team running Starlink and the Russian military about keeping Starlink up. But if they didn't have that, it would, you know, GG well played.
2 questions for you. I know you are very skeptical about whether or not there's going to be, let's say, a peace deal. But the fact that Trump is killing intelligence, and as you pointed out, the role that intelligence plays in this war and the significance of it, killing weapons, or let's say support.
Okay, now it has to be said that both Russians and Ukrainians on the ground are saying that the intelligence flow largely continues.
Fair enough.
I can't confirm that, but I take something when I hear Russian forces on the ground saying they're still getting all the satellite data. We know they are, right? Compared to Trump saying it and the British saying in the back pages of the Financial Times, we're going to give it to them anyway. You know, F you, Trump, right? I have to go with the guys on the ground. So I would like it to be shut off, right? I haven't seen conclusive evidence. I would say that it is likely, to some degree at least, that the normal flow of information has been disrupted. And I would point out that there have been no long-range missile attacks into Russia since Trump took office. That already there is a significant walk back from World War III, right? I mean, because Russia was ready to start firing missiles at U.S. bases around the world, right? They were absolutely, we reserve the right, and the only thing that was stopping them from doing that was knowing that Trump was going to take office in a couple of months. And trying to provoke them. And that Trump right away said, that's crazy, that's World War III stuff, even before he took office. So
it does seem that Trump is moving in a particular direction.
Yeah. There's a trend. It's not deniable at all, right? And he has gone much further, it has to be said, than I ever thought he would, right? And I have largely given up on predicting Trump because one day Zelensky's a dictator, and the next day, did I say that? That doesn't sound like something I'd say, right? He's doing much more than I thought he would, but I mean, there has to be a limit to what he can and won't do, because we're lucky that both the Kiev regime, that both Zelensky and the Europeans, to a larger extent, Zelensky, are playing this dumb, right? If they were smart, all they would have to do is say, okay, you pulled my arm, I'll sit down to talks. We're ready for a ceasefire, and then turn to Russia and say ceasefire, and Russia says no.
No.
We said no. And then it's Russia who is responsible for the peace process not moving forward. They're too stupid to do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's domestic political concerns that the ultranationalists, the Banderites would go off the handle and so forth. Yeah, and that's probably a concern. But they could play this diplomatically so much smarter, right? I mean, that whole fracas in the White House was completely unnecessary. I had initially, until I saw the full 50 minutes, thought that it might have been an ambush by Trump and Vance.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. If you watch the whole thing, it's quite clear. Zelensky, deliberately, he was frustrated and desperate.
He didn't want the deal. Yeah, he didn't want the deal.
He was entitled, right? And he's a spoiled brat, and he expects to be given what he wants. And he doesn't understand that this administration does not agree with the narrative that the Biden administration had been operating under for 3 years, and to wake up to that. Now, can he continue to keep aid from flowing, military, financial, intelligence aid from flowing to Kiev at some point when Trump is demanding a ceasefire before negotiations? Russia is absolutely firm. We've been down this road before. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul, no more ceasefires. We get a final deal, right? And only then, which it must be said was actually what happened in the negotiation process in the Vietnam War as well, right? The North Vietnam, they refused. They said no ceasefire, right? They weren't interested in a ceasefire. And negotiations continued for years while the fighting continued until they finally reached a deal and the U.S. announced their withdrawal and everything collapsed. You could draw similar conclusions from what happened in Afghanistan, right? Mm-hmm. Trump began negotiations with the Taliban, completely ignoring the U.S. installed regime in Kabul, right? And they were saying, we don't want a peace deal. You can't leave us. And they were completely ignored by both Trump and then in the end by Biden, right? And they dealt with the Taliban over their proxy's head. And if there had been any smart people in Kiev, they would have seen this pattern to U.S. behavior, where when they decide to cut and run, that the proxy is going to be strung out, right? So that seems likely. Now, that said, Keir Starmer and Macron are going to be evidently going back to Washington again this week with, begging, cajoling, I don't know, do they have blackmail? I don't know, right? Doing the same thing again, trying to pull the U.S. back into this conflict to one degree or another, right? They keep demanding, Kiev demands security guarantees for themselves. The Europeans are like, well, we'll put troops on the ground. We'll give them security guarantees as long as you give us security guarantees. Because everyone knows that our forces can't stand against the Russians, and likely the Americans can't as well. And the Americans know that. Not here, not now, right? Not under these conditions. And that's why they're not willing to. But it amounts to the same thing. If you give security guarantees to European NATO forces and they put troops on the ground, and oops, the Ukrainian forces arrange for some kind of violation of the ceasefire, then suddenly it's literal World War III. And there's plenty of Europeans that are perfectly willing to risk that.
These stupid idiots keep starting third world wars. I was telling somebody else that. I was like, you guys
Biden was willing to risk that. Well, it has to be said, Biden never promised security guarantees either. Right? He did lots of things, but he didn't write anything on paper, right? He refused to give formal security guarantees to Ukraine either. So a lot of this political now fire on Trump from the media and so forth in the US, they easily forget that Biden or Biden's corpse's handlers refused to do the same thing while Biden's corpse was still in office, up until January of this year as well. So that's just internecine domestic politics in the U.S. as usual.
Last question, Mark. About a minute. In Syria, Russia opened its military base to allow many of the minority communities in the base that were effectively being slaughtered by HTS.
Right, let's say it. Al-Qaeda. Say the word. Right? There is no Syrian government. Al-Qaeda. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is Al-Qaeda. The U.S. government admitted they were Al-Qaeda. They're still listed as a terrorist organization in the United States and in the United Nations. Al-Qaeda is in control of Syria, and Al-Qaeda is committing a genocide of ethno-religious minorities in Syria against the Alawites, against the Christians, against the Druze, and the entire Western mainstream media is playing a game of whitewashing and apologia and ignoring, see no evil, hear no evil, fear no evil, under clashes with Assad loyalists and all of this type of nonsense.
That is the way that they're trying to describe it here in the United States. Assad loyalists are fighting.
They are going house to house and killing people, dragging them out into the street in their socks and slippers and shooting them all en masse in front of their houses, right? This is clearly happening. The videos are all over Twitter. There's no question about this. Even the jihadists defenders like Charles Lister and the like are commenting, well, they're Assad loyal. All Alawites are Assad loyalists and basically deserve it, right? That's what they're saying. So, I mean, Russia can't do anything at this point. I mean, this was inevitable when they stopped, when the Syrian Arab army was bought out, sold out, co-opted. Its generals stood down. Its troops told, lay down your weapons, take off your uniforms, run away and go home. When that happened, this was inevitable. This was always just a matter of time until it happened. And the new leader of Syria, right, Al-Julani or Al-Shara, as they're calling him now, check him out, because the Western mainstream media ignores this. Even Wikipedia admits it. This guy was once the leader of ISIS in Syria. He was once the leader of a high-ranking member of Jabhat al-Nusra, which was another rebranding of Al-Qaeda. And now he is for years he was the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is another rebranding of Al-Qaeda in Syria. He is literally today's Osama bin Laden.
Yes,
right?
He's a headshot. I mean, he's a literal headshot.
He is a literal Sunni jihadist, Wahhabist, and I mean, it's just it was all the way back to Jake Sullivan in this email, that we've all seen from the Snowden releases. Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, and they pulled one out, with a big role from Turkey. It must be said. I ultimately, at least right now, regard Erdogan as more responsible for all of this than the United States. I'm sure the U.S. and Israel and the UK and France all had their fingers in it, but 90% of this was Erdogan, right? He's an Islamist himself. He has always been with us. And what's happening now is primarily himself. But Al-Qaeda won. Al-Qaeda now has Syria. And yes, there has been an uprising in the Lataki area, right, of people who are, already living under the repression of Al-Qaeda, and they don't want, and they were rising up, and so they sent the dogs in. And the dogs, of course, are not just killing, the actual people who were fighting, right? They're now going through and just wiping out all the Alawites, all the Syrian Christians, right? Village to village, wiping out entire settlements. And what we're seeing is only the tip of the iceberg, because we are seeing primarily the videos that these jihadist monsters are taping and uploading to the internet themselves because they're proud, right? This is genocide, right? Forget this noise Uyghur nonsense, right? That, the U.S., this is actual genocide. And right now, certainly the European governments and the mainstream media are involved in a huge whitewashing and apologia and they're just the Alawites and Christians in Syria. We never cared about them anyway because they were always on the other side. And
they don't call them that. They said they're Assad loyalists. That's the way they described them in the U.S. media. Assad loyalists, which just
Tulsi Gabbard, though, during her confirmation hearings, warned of exactly this. She said it outright. Al-Qaeda is in charge of Syria, and this is going to be the result. So I'm very interested to see what comes out of the Trump administration on this, because I know Tulsi Gabbard is on the right side of it, if no one else.
Mark Sloboda, international relations security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sloboda1. You can follow him on his YouTube channel at Real Politics with Mark Sloboda, and you can find him on Facebook.com/Gramsci. Mark, thank you, my man. Always appreciate it.
May I have one more word?
Go for it.
This was always inevitable when the Syrian Arab army gave up, right? Whatever the economic conditions, yes, they stopped defending their state. And this was the state that, however flawed, protected the ethno-religious minorities in Syria from exactly what is happening now. Now the people are paying the price of not fighting to defend that state. This is exactly why Hobbes wrote the Leviathan, right? Yeah. If you're not familiar with realist international relations political theory, you need to read Hobbes, right? The state is the Leviathan. It's not a good thing, but human beings, being what they are, life without the state is nasty, brutish, and short. And the organization of the state ultimately is the only thing that can protect you from your crazy, drugged up, jihadi, etc. neighbor. This is why the Leviathan is a grim necessity. And if you fail to defend that state, well, then this is the result. That's why I'm a statist.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Mark. I'm going to pick that book up. I'm going to read that book. I'm familiar with the term Hobbes' choice. Let me use that, man. I will find this book and I will read this book. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it, man. Be safe.
Sure.
All right. I would like to bring in my guests. I have never had the opportunity to actually see you, so I am glad to actually see you in person of sorts. Colleen Rowley. She's a lawyer, retired FBI agent, former MPLS legal counsel, who wrote a memo about FBI's pre-9/11 failures and testified in the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was also a Democratic Farmer Labor Party candidate for Congress in Minnesota. Welcome to the show. How you doing, Colleen? You doing all right?
Well, we just got back from a road trip, so still in a little state of disarray here, but otherwise fine. It's really nice in Minnesota. It's we got really warm front coming through, so it's a little bit odd, but we do have a real warm front.
There's nothing wrong with that. Can I ask what the road trip, where you guys had the opportunity to go?
We went south and west and ended up in Tucson. Went to a lot of museums. Yeah. I will recommend one of the best museums was the George Washington Carver Museum outside of Joplin, Missouri. He's quite. I didn't know anything about him except he had something to do with the peanut.
Yes.
But literally his childhood story and how he got to college. Actually, the only college that let him in was in Ames, Iowa. I mean, it's real interesting. If you're going through Joplin, go to the George Washington Carver site.
Very cool. Oh, that's so cool. I'm glad you had the opportunity to have the road trip. Those things are always a lot of fun when you get the opportunity to do them. I brought you on because for the Epstein files release, and I'm not going to go into the files themselves. What I want to go into, a lot of people have been, let's say, annoyed, underwhelmed, unsatisfied with the release of those files, because what they wanted with the release of those files were names. Their thought was, we want the names of the people who are associated with Epstein. And the reason is rather straightforward and obvious, right? They said the guy was an apex predator. They say he preyed on all of these people, all of these kids. They say that he was effectively filming people in order to blackmail those people when they hooked up with those kids. And so people were like, okay, fair enough. If this guy is who you say he is, then there should be a list of people who are working with him, that were in association with him. And if you have thousands of files, release the files. And it's not the files, they wanted the names. You pointed out to me that they could not release those names, even if they wanted to. Go into that. I did not know this about the way the federal government works. Explain that to the audience on why they can, because the audience, I'm telling you, what people are going to say is, you're not releasing the names because some of those names are influential, powerful, and because they're influential and powerful, that is not something that they want released. In fact, some of the people who may be implicated, people like Trump, people like Bill Clinton, people like Alan Dershowitz, but there were other Democrats, with a governor of New Mexico. I can't think of his name, but he's not the governor now, but he used to be the governor of New Mexico. Like all of these people either were on that plane or had associations with Epstein. And Epstein had relationships all throughout entertainment, all throughout like political space, and nobody knows how it happened. It's like his wealth, all of that stuff is very weird. And so people are like, oh, okay, who were working with Epstein in this? Your point to me in the text message was the government cannot release those names, even if the government had those names, even if the government wanted to release those names. By law, they cannot release those names. Explain that to the audience for me.
Yeah, I worked for 13 years, last part of my career. One of my roles was the Freedom of Information Coordinator, and I had a couple of a paralegal. So when people make a request, and of course, Epstein being deceased, when a famous person dies, obviously historians and other people come in out of morbid curiosity to find out what is their FBI file. And so under FOIA, when you're deceased, you lose your privacy rights. And so then, yeah, you can go through. Now, you still have people that are alive. So any identity of a person who is still alive in that file gets a little black mark. So when you get your the file, even if you, like I said, even if a lot of people are deceased, you'll then learn some of the identities of people, but you will still see some black marks. And those black marks are redacted out names of people who are still alive. The reason for that is there is a law, the Privacy Act of 1974. Okay, so a lot of these laws make sense up to a point. And the Privacy Act obviously makes sense. You don't want people besmirched or impugned because they were mentioned. Let's say your neighbor was a serial killer and you get interviewed, and you wouldn't want your name going out to the public as having said something bad about your neighbor. Okay, so of course the Privacy Act makes a lot of sense, and it certainly makes even more sense with respect to victims. You don't want, victims have already been victimized. You don't want them victimized through public, notoriety a second time. So it makes a lot of sense. And that law means that anyone who is still alive and their names. Now, this would apply in the Epstein case. Now, I did this for 13 years, FOIA, Freedom of Information. But in the Epstein case, the people who were, Epstein was going to be prosecuted. And Ghislaine Maxwell, who worked with him, was going to be prosecuted, even though she's not deceased. So they lose their privacy. When you get prosecuted, no Privacy Act of 1974 protects your identity. And there are exceptions to the Privacy Act, obviously for prosecution and even for investigation. Sometimes you say the name of somebody because you're trying to learn what is the story. The FBI, it's hard for an FBI agent to violate. Now, if an FBI agent knows something about somebody because they learned it in an FBI investigation or a file, and they tell someone, they can actually be prosecuted themselves for that. I think it's, $5,000, whatever. And I forget the penalty. And every once in a while, you'll see that, I don't know if the whistleblowers or, someone like Comey, when they go to the press, obviously, and give information about a private individual, then they can actually be prosecuted. Whistleblowers have to be very careful about that. Okay, so there's besides the Privacy Act of 1974, I feel sorry for Attorney General Bondi trying to do this now, because she's promised to release the files.
Yes.
And besides the Privacy Act, there's some other laws. One of the main ones is the grand jury secrecy rule. So anything that was put before a grand jury is also protected by secrecy. There's other things. Now, the one thing that people know is classification. That's different. So when you're classifying files for foreign policy, essentially for foreign policy, that can be declassified by the president or by someone else. So just because something was declassified for purposes of foreign policy doesn't mean it gets around the Privacy Act, the grand jury secrecy, etc. And you have to feel sorry for someone like again, the Attorney General. I'm sure that maybe right now, because she's kind of painted herself into a corner, promising to release, maybe she has a bunch of FBI agents sitting there with their black magic markers and trying to go through this, blacking out names. I'm assuming that is maybe going on. If you remember this, no, you probably don't remember. It's even before my time. During COINTELPRO, the Hoover's FBI investigated a whole bunch of organizations and groups, including, of all groups, he actually investigated the National Lawyers Guild. You wouldn't think that attorneys would become the target of FBI investigation, but they did. And there were literally files, these were paper files up to the ceiling, that all the agents were going out and spying on the National Lawyers Guild. Well, the National Lawyers Guild sued under FOIA for their file after Hoover was dead. And they took like several years to win their lawsuit. But once they won the lawsuit, I think it took 7 years to win the lawsuit. Then, like I said, they had a room full of these files. And what they did back in like early 80s, they had an FBI agent could volunteer to go to FBI headquarters, sit in a room, go through these files with magic markers. And I think it was actually went on for a month or two. And it was called the National Lawyer Guild Special. You went into it. We think about FBI agents as Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Running around and shooting, the bad guys, etc. These were FBI agents sitting in a room with a black magic marker because they lost a very important lawsuit against the National Lawyers Guild. Okay, so that's, anyway, you feel sorry for people now trying to legally process the files, because it's not simply about declassification. There's other laws that protect identity. Now, I'm thinking out loud, and in a case like Epstein, because the reason Epstein case is very different than the normal one is because you got this mixture of a foreign country, i.e. Israel, possibly through Epstein, blackmailing some of the highest level officials of the United States, the UK, probably some other countries. The only one we really know is Prince Andrew.
Right.
That came out. We know he was up to his eyeballs in this kind of blackmail and stuff. We don't know the extent of it. And so one thing about the Privacy Act, when it's public corruption, when it's this level of potential, I should qualify because we don't know, but this level of potential public corruption, honestly, at this point, the Privacy Act is less important. And so if there are other Prince Andrews who were this corrupted by being filmed in sex acts and stuff with illegal, pedophile sex acts, if that's the case, that probably a judge, if I was a judge, if I was the Supreme Court, at that point, I'd say, you know what? Now we have a whole different situation. The Privacy Act, the grand jury, maybe we need another mechanism to have some level of public accountability for this very serious infringement. So, but I'm just speculating because this is beyond right now, way beyond. But if you had a situation like this arise again, where a foreign country was using a honey pot or all these things, really, there should be an exception in the laws that allows for the public to learn of this. So that the reason being, okay, and the other way around it would be prosecution. Bondi could have the FBI review the files. And if there is more people like Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the daughter of a major Mossad operator, okay, if there are more individuals like her that are actually themselves not just participating, but actually more complicit with it, then you know what? They should prosecute them, because if they prosecute them, then yes, that's the way for some accountability. That's the way for the public to learn. I have arguments with people now who do not understand the level of this kind of potential government corruption, and they just are naive. They don't understand. Oh no, my congressperson would never be that kind. But I tell them, I name all the names. There was one guy, Duke Cunningham, who was having sex orgies on his yacht. I just name all. There was a guy, I forget his name. I think it was Duke Cunningham. There was a guy there was a congressman who had a yacht parked out somewhere in the bay near Washington. And he was having all kinds of parties. And eventually they found out about him. And plus he was corrupt. He was doing things with his real estate and all. So he's one example, but there's literally dozens of examples in history of public officials being corrupted like this. And and again, the public actually just doesn't want to know, because it's quote unquote our democracy, which we want to have this myth about our democracy. And public corruption is what happens even in democracies. The only way to have a democracy is you got to be very vigilant, extremely vigilant against any public. Here's another great example. It goes way back to 79, but remember Abscam. Abscam was this old case that FBI Director Webster, he pretended the FBI agents were undercovers, and they dressed up like Middle Eastern wealthy oligarchs from the Middle East. And they went in with basically little bags of money. They went in with their suitcase of money, and they targeted 7 congresspersons. I think it was 7. 6 of them, they didn't even have to go to the first stage. They picked up the money and went out. It was that easy. I mean, again, people don't want to know. It was that easy to bribe 6 of the 7. And actually, FBI Director Webster, who's I think he's like 100 years old now. He's still alive. He was a little criticized because nobody wants to know it's that easy to bribe a public official.
How dare you bribe our public officials like that and expose them? Yes,
exactly. It was called Abscam. You can look it up on Wikipedia. I am not exaggerating or anything. One of the 7, he's now dead. His name was I'll remember. Murtha. He's now deceased, so I can talk about him. But Murtha, he didn't pick up the money and run. All he said was, "I'll think about it." And so they couldn't prosecute. John Murtha, he stayed in for his whole entire career, and he didn't pick it up. He said, well, I'm not sure about that. I'll think about it. So anyway, that's the level. And actually the FBI director is the one who got criticized. He said, you should never have had undercovers trying to entice our congresspersons, because and they actually should. If I ever became FBI director, I would launch a lot of ab scams. Because this is how you clean up the blob. This is how you clean it up. If they had a reason to be worried about bribery, if they had a reason to worry about it, that there was some accountability, you know what? We would have a better government.
Yes. I 1000% agree with you. I remember. I'm going to end it on this, but when Tulsi Gabbard was at the when she was getting confirmed, and I remember one of the Congress members asked her, "Hey, you told all of this stuff about the things that we were doing abroad," and she was like, "Well, yeah, because we were doing those things abroad." And he says, yeah, I get that. But why'd you tell? It wasn't what they were doing. It was the fact that she brought it up that they took issue with. And it puts me in mind of the app scam thing. It's like, it's not the fact that they're corrupt. It's the fact that you're bringing up the fact that they're corrupt. That seems to be the issue. That's outrageous to me, but you're right. It's the way they think about it. I would say, though, that I think they've gotten more refined in how they do their bribery. John Kiriakou, good friend of the show, he's going to be on this week. John Kiriakou was the guy that revealed the torture regime under George Bush. Kiriakou wanted a pardon. And so he found out that Giuliani was offering to sell pardons. Now, this was massively illegal, right? And John goes to talk to Giuliani and his lawyer, and Giuliani doesn't bring it up. And so John is like, hey, what about the stuff about the pardon? Giuliani gets up, walks to the bathroom, and his lawyer says, you don't talk to him about the pardon, you talk to me. Like, they've gotten far more refined in the way that they go about this stuff. Even Joe Biden with the Hunter Biden stuff, where Hunter Biden is like, I'm sitting here with my father, and if you don't give me $20 million, there's going to be hell to pay. Okay, well, Joe Biden is not directly getting involved. It's being done in this kind of gray area way where it tries to keep the principal out of it, while there's some other lawyer or some other device that does the dealing. Now, it's gotten far more refined as opposed to bags of money. Colleen, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. Very informative.
Yeah, it's quite the tangled web we weave at this point, and it's so normal. I think the reason that that's possible, as you said, you get a lot of other lawyers and other intermediaries, bagmen, that type of thing. The reason that's possible is because it's so normalized at this point. That's exactly right. Very sad, very sad.
Colleen Rowley. She is a lawyer, retired FBI agent, former MPLS legal counsel, who wrote a memo about the FBI's pre-9/11 failures and testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was also Democratic Farmer Labor Party candidate in the Congress of Minneapolis. Thank you for this, Colleen. Very informative. I really appreciate it. You have a good one.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye. Be safe. Oh, she's so cool. She is so cool. I've never had the opportunity to actually meet her. And so usually when we're having a conversation, we're having a conversation on the radio. So shout out to her for this. I deeply appreciate her for joining me. We're going to have one more guest. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the Morandi video. I didn't get the opportunity to do it because of the way the time broke down. Garland, shout out to him, came on, love that guy. Him and I are going to have a show later this evening at 4:00. So definitely check us out. I think what Garland and I are going to do, are probably going to have more shows. The audience seems to enjoy it. His audience seems to enjoy it. My audience seems to enjoy it. So we're probably going to have more of those. It's going to be over the course of the week. Right now, it's probably going to be Monday and Fridays. I'm going to have to get with him, see how we're going to pull that off. The audience seems to enjoy it. And so I enjoy talking to Garland. I tried to get him. So, Fault Lines was Garland's show. And for a year after I started Fault Lines, in my mind, I'm doing Garland's show. That was the way I thought about it. And at one point, because we kept having trouble with guests, I mean, with hosts, because we went through like 5 hosts, just back to back, back to back. And people were like, Jamal is getting rid of these hosts. And I'm like, dude, I'm not doing anything. They just don't work. And I remember at one point I was like, well, let's bring Garland back and let's both of us have a show. And I think the issue more so was its fault lines. They wanted more political opposition. They didn't want nuanced opposition. They wanted full blown, I disagree with this guy for so and so. That doesn't work, by the way. Oh, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Because it wouldn't work with me. I put it that way. I'm not going to say it as an absolute. If, for example, if you look at Robbie and Brianna Gray on the Hill, when she was on the Hill, the fights that them two used to have, were withering, especially on the issue of Gaza. If you remember, Brianna was hardcore on that issue, and God bless her for being so. It's like, how are you neutral in the middle of a genocide? Like if you're watching the Native Americans being slaughtered, how do you stand there and be neutral? You can't. Neutrality is effectively catering to the side of the genocider in that situation. Okay, well, she was doing God's work on that show. The fights were withering. They were withering. And it got to the point where it became clear they don't like each other. When you get to that point, it breaks the show. It breaks the show. You need the hosts to be able to like each other in order for the show to work, even if they're disagreeing. But let me bring in my guests. I am joined with the ironically named Lauren Fix. She is an auto expert, car coach reports analyst. Lauren, welcome to the show. How are you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing good. Good. I'm sorry for the picture moving all over the place, but
You're perfectly fine. Picture is perfectly fine. No, I appreciate you joining me. I brought you on because Donald Trump is waging a tariff war against the world. Right now, it's going against Canada and Mexico. It's going to hit things like aluminum, steel, those type of products. This war at some point is going to be waged against Europe. It's also being waged against China. Trump has said that he may make it worse if they retaliate. Canada is retaliating.
yes.
And even though Donald Trump held his hand, I think, for like a month because he thought it was going to damage the car industry, Canada's not waiting. Mexico is not waiting. All of them are effectively pushing back. China is even pushing back. This is going to cause chaos. And Trump himself has even pointed out in a recent interview that this may cause a recession. So yeah, it may be a little bit rocky, but we'll be fine. We have a great economy.
Well, Scott Bessent says it won't be a recession. So I kind of have to look at the guy who knows the finances. But you got to remember, this is all 100% a move to get them to come to the table. And this is what nobody's talking about. USMCA is meant to be renegotiated in July of 2026. So he wants to renegotiate. So how do you negotiate earlier? If he's bringing them to the table, he's not going to actually, it'll go through for a short little window of time. And Mexico's already bent over and said, oh, no, we're sending more military to the border. So he's already in negotiations with Mexico. So that's going to be taken care of quickly because you have to understand, and there's so much more than just what you're saying. It's easy for consumers to say, oh my gosh, everything's going to be more expensive. I've heard so many ridiculous stories with people saying like, cars are going to be 20% more expensive. No, they're not. I promise you. Some guy said, I paid 20 grand more for the car. Well, you picked a bad dealer and a bad salesperson. You're a fool for not shopping around. I can't make people pay attention. However, there's a lot more to this than people realize. And I think that's really the big thing, Jamal. And I think this is really big. First off, besides the USMCA, getting them back to the table. So what happened was there was an agreement that was made, but Canada and Mexico figured out ways to bypass that agreement and basically increase tariffs to us, but we couldn't tariff them. Smart, give them credit for that. However, now that this president is in, he's like, we're not doing that anymore. So I'm going to bring you back to the table. I'm going to pressure you back to the table to discuss. So because our GDP is only 2.9% of Canada and like 2.6 from Mexico, so it's nothing. But go the other direction, we're 40% of Canada's GDP. That's
I see.
huge. And we're 38% or something like that of Mexico. So that's huge. So the
Real quick,
impact is
sorry
bigger
to
to them
interrupt.
than it is to us.
Explain something to me. Donald Trump negotiated the USMC. What is it? USMCA.
USMCA, yeah, that's our
He said it was a
US,
fantastic
Mexico,
deal.
Canada, yeah.
He said it was a fantastic deal. He said this deal was the greatest deal in the planet.
It
in the
was
history
a
of
good
deals.
deal at the time.
All right. So what do you mean at the time? Like either it's a
Well,
deal or it's not. I mean, you negotiated a
Like
deal
if
with the
I
idea that it's going to
negotiate
go
a
into the
deal with
foreseeable
you,
future.
right? I negotiate a deal with you to do my yard work.
Mhm.
And maybe you cut some corners. Maybe you find loopholes to save yourself some money, because that would be what a smart business person would do, right? You would try to find ways to cut corners to still get the job done, but maybe more advantageous to you.
Right.
Okay. I mean, a good business person would do that. But that's exactly what Mexico and Canada did. What
I
they
know,
did
but a
was
good
they
business person would do a deal in a way where they wouldn't be able to cut corners like that. If it's a big, beautiful deal,
that deal is like, you, you and I would need
it's
like
huge.
War and Peace. We'd have to
Yeah.
read through every little, but
Right,
somebody
right.
did. Somebody did in each country and said, "Ooh, there's a loophole here." There's always loopholes, and people are creative, and that's what we are as humans, right? We're creative and
Right.
look for things to go, "I didn't see this." So maybe somewhere someone found a loophole or created a loophole, or however it might be, or they just said, "We're going to raise the tariffs on the U.S." and no one did anything about it. Again, different president, different rules. It's just like a different teacher. If you go to school, every teacher's got their own rules and when they expect papers due and all, same kind of thing is in a much bigger picture. So I think the goal was that he realized that they were taking advantage of us, which is true. They are. They have a very high tariff on our things going in, but coming back, we have nothing.
On yours,
So
yeah.
we're getting screwed. So they'd be like, you give me money to enter my house, but I don't have to give you money to enter yours, essentially.
Right.
And I think that's where a
Trump
lot of
is.
people, yeah. And so because of that, that's where Besant is. He's saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. And he's very smart, by the way. So is Lutnick, really off the chart smart people. And so you always want to surround yourself with people that are specialists in that area. If it's automotive, you give me a call. If it's finance, don't call me. You know what I'm saying? So it's the same kind of everyone has a sweet spot. Elon Musk, apparently, whether you like him or not, has great ability to cut waste and expense, which he did at Twitter. And all that, we don't know how that's going to all
Wow.
unwind. You can say whatever you want. We don't know how it's actually going to unwind, but none of us, nobody wants wasted money going to politicians or to someplace where it's being spent frivolously. I mean, you wouldn't want
Right.
that either.
But
So
the catch
from that
is, what does that
perspective,
mean?
well,
What
we
catch is
don't
what does that
know.
mean?
There's a lot more coming out. So until we have a bigger picture, and he's only got a year and a half to do this. So you got to move quick. If I gave you a year and a half to do it with your own personal budget, you wouldn't be able to do it overnight. You'd be like, oh, this is a big project. This
Yeah,
is
but
a
the government
much
is a huge project, and the government
yeah.
is not a business. And this idea
You're
of
right.
cutting
It's
waste on
not a
is
business. You're
he does
correct.
not know enough about the way the government operates and all of these different agencies to be able to cut in the way that he's doing in a short period of time.
Well, that's
I
why Trump told each person in charge of each department, you must work with him, because some of them have been pulled back. I think Pete Hegseth pulled back some stuff.
Rubio, there was apparently a
Rubio
fight
did
between
a
Rubio and
couple of them.
Musk.
Well, we don't know
Yeah.
if that's true. No, you and I weren't in the room. So there's so much stories and amplification of someone who could have said something like, hey, move your coffee, I'm not moving my coffee, kind of thing. You don't
The
know.
reporting
We
on
don't
the
know.
story
We're
goes
hearing
beyond
what
the
the
movie
press
coffee.
says.
Look,
Yeah.
I don't think you should.
This is why you have this outlet, by the way. You have this outlet because you tell the truth, and sometimes the mainstream media doesn't.
I perfectly respect Rubio if he told Elon Musk to go suck it. If he's
Rubio's
like,
an interesting guy. He's an interesting guy. Remember, he
I've
comes
been
from the
fascinated with
Senate.
him. Yeah, I've been fascinated with him in this administration.
Yeah,
I
me
mean,
too.
like Trump has bent these people into form. He really has.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch the people he's chosen this time versus last time. And again,
Yes.
we're not going to know this right away. We're only 6 weeks in, and everybody's making judgment calls. If I could make a judgment call in 6 weeks of a business or a government or anything that quickly, it'd be very challenging. So we have to go with what we know, which isn't much in reality.
That's fair.
But I like
So
the fact that you have this outlet because you get to tell the truth. And a
I
lot of
try
times,
to.
mainstream media, they're on 24/7 and they need to keep hyping the story, whatever story that might be, because it's something to talk about. Bring guests on to talk about something that's being hyped, hyped, hyped. What you talk about is you focus in on things that people want to know about, and you tell the truth because that's who you are. And I
I
think
try
that's
to.
what, and I appreciate that. And I think a lot of people are. That's why they're moving to this type of
Social
media.
media.
And we're seeing this in our business too, as we both know.
Yeah. So with Canada, well, like you said, Mexico bent over. Fair enough.
You could call it
Canada
that.
is in a
They
pissing
gave
match.
in. They gave in is a nice way to put it. They said, you know what? We can't afford this. And mind you, there's a lot more going on in Mexico. They have so much of their how do we put this nicely? The legal business seems to run the government. How's that the nice way of
Fair
putting
enough.
it?
Fair enough.
Canada is completely different. Canada has
Yeah.
a new leader. Trudeau is out. He made a fool of himself and he let Trump berate him, which I thought was hysterical. I have a lot of Canadian friends. Everybody
Kept
loved
calling him governor.
Governor. I
You're
know.
right.
It was, I was dying.
Trudeau.
Oh, it's great. You know why it was so funny? It was funny because he didn't like push back on that. It was like, dude, if
Yeah.
you're the prime minister, act like a prime minister. Don't try, stay with whatever it is you are. Whoever you are, be that person. Instead, he was trying to be, I don't know, something else. So now there's a new, I think his name is Carney, who's in. And I talked to a friend of
Mhm.
mine who's pretty big in politics over the weekend in Canada, and he said how this works, and it's completely different from us. And this is going to be a big, interesting move. So now that Trudeau is out, the party of the Liberals there have chosen Carney to be their leader. Now
Right.
his job is within the next 24 hours, he has to call for an election. That election would put Povier, who is the guy who was eating the apple. Everyone kind of knows about why he was talking. He's really interesting. The Canadians call him the Canadian Trump, but I don't see that at all. I think he's very middle of the road,
Uh-huh.
and so they're going to run him against. I don't know if Trudeau can even run again because again, their politics is
Oh, he
completely
got
different.
humiliated. I can't see it. Trudeau was hated
No,
at the point when he
no.
left.
Well, there was a lot more to that. During COVID, he did some pretty nasty things. And I have a lot of friends that are Canadian who have told me some. When you don't live there, you don't know. It's like, what's going on in France? I don't know. People are enjoying baguettes. I mean, you really don't know until you talk to people that live in it. See, you know what I'm saying? We don't know. And their politics are completely different. And to be a political expert, you should call a political expert because it's completely different.
Right.
But what they are doing, and this is from my friend who's really into it, and he's not picking sides on either one. He says that there could be other candidates that will run, and then they will run a temporary election that will be that person who will be the prime minister until November when they do another election. I'm like, this is a
What?
lot. This, I know. If could you imagine the stress on the
That's
people
so
there?
weird. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
lot of elections. Okay, fair
I
enough.
agree. It's very strange. But that's how they do it. And they usually do this thing that's also weird. They'll do like 2 years or 4 years of one, like the liberals, then they'll go to the conservatives, then they'll go back to the liberals, and they go back and forth so that there's balance. It's basically the British structure, the UK.
The
Um,
parliamentary system.
yeah, it's different. I mean, their president is not like our president. They still have control over from England. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. I mean, every country's there. You're talking about Greenland, for example. That's a whole other government. I mean, and so because each one has their own little nuances, and those that live there know. I was talking to someone about Greenland over the weekend. Wow, talk about completely different governance. There's only 65,000 people there. I
Yeah,
think
it's
there's
small.
probably that many in
Tiny.
DC.
Yeah, yeah, it's tiny. It's not
It's
many
very
people.
tiny, but they have a lot of wealth because of their rare earth minerals and they have a lot of jewels and things. So obviously, and of course, their location makes it a very valuable location. So they say
Right.
they want to pull away from everyone. So again, all this stuff are impacts on tariffs. What I do want to watch is the tariffs on China and the tariffs on Japan, the tariffs on Germany. So why we're
Mhm.
thinking what's going on with Canada and Mexico, what's really going to happen is they're going to eventually sit down. Whoever the next prime minister is, again, this is just going to hover in Canada until they find their next leader, whoever that may be, will have to sit down with President Trump and his team and say, hey, how do we work this out? they'll figure out something. I don't believe it's going to create a recession. I think what'll happen is they're going to come to the table and say, all right, either we have no tariffs back and forth, because car parts do this. We build a sub-assembly, we ship it across to Canada, they finish the assembly in a truck, or parts are made in Canada, they come to the US and they're finished in a vehicle here. And it goes back and forth, sometimes multiple times. And that was the whole idea of USMCA, see, I'm doing it too, was back and forth so that we could have no tariffs across the border. But they decided to charge tariffs. So now Trump's like, well, hold on, we're giving you $900 billion a year. That's a lot of money. Why are we doing that? Because no one put a stop to it. So it should have been from the beginning when they go, hey, we're going to tariff you. You're like, no, we're not, but no one enforced the agreement. And so Mexico is already like, ooh, hold on, because they build Audis there, Volkswagens there, GM builds cars there, Ford builds their Mach-E there. I mean, there's a lot of movement back and forth across the border. What isn't good for the US is when they build final assembly there, UAW workers don't get jobs here. And that's a problem. That is also a big factor. That's why the UAW is like, yeah, tariff the hell out of them, because they want the jobs back.
Well, that was the other part of tariffs, right? That try to get them to bring their companies back into the United States.
Correct.
Do you think it's going to work? I mean, like, it's a company making more money. You think it is?
Oh, no, we haven't. Honda said they're bringing the Civic to Indiana. Stellantis, which is they're going to bring the Dodge Ram and a couple of things back from the Mexico plant. See, they had a huge war with the UAW, where the UAW made them the pinpoint, and they went after Stellantis. Stellantis said, oh, we can't take on this burden of all these additional costs. So they said, we're going to build all of our Durangos and our Rams in Mexico. And they immediately shut down the plant in Belvidere, Illinois, putting about 15,000 people out of jobs. And they said, the heck with you. We're going to, remember, they're not owned by the US. They're a Belgian company. That is the key that people don't realize. So while you're thinking, oh, I didn't know that. So really, there are only 3 US companies: Tesla, Ford, and GM. That's it. Tesla builds cars here. So whether you like Elon Musk or not, doesn't make a difference. Those vehicles are built here. They give us jobs. And there are jobs in the service department, the collision department, the parts department, the sales, whatever. It's a lot of jobs. I think I looked today, it was like 275,000 employees in the US. That's a heck of a lot of people. And you do not want to have those people out of work. So although people don't think of Tesla as a US car company, it is. They build in Texas, they build in California. They have some components that come from elsewhere, which he's trying to bring here, trying to do a battery plant in Las Vegas or outside of Las Vegas, because it's jobs. And that's smart. Also, other companies are starting to look like Volkswagen Group, which is Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen, of course. They're talking about bringing in the main selling vehicles, which would be like the Porsche Macan and the Audi Q5, building those in the Chattanooga plant, which just went UAW. There are a lot of plants in the US that are not UAW, but Mercedes builds cars here. BMW has their largest plant in South Carolina. They are the #1 employer for the whole state. It's in Spartanburg. I've been there. It's a huge facility. They're building even 2 more huge buildings. Every BMW SUV is built in South Carolina. Everyone. Isn't that wild? And they're shipped all over the world. Every single SUV. They're also building the diesel vehicles here, the electric vehicles here, and then they ship them elsewhere. So I give them a lot of credit. Hyundai's building cars here. They're building their Ioniq 5, which is their electric car. They're in West Point, Georgia. They have a Kia Hyundai plant there. There's one in Alabama as well. All Korean cars are being built here pretty much for the US market. Volvo builds their cars here. They're owned by a Chinese car company, but but here's the key thing. They're built in South Carolina. So they can use the same suppliers that BMW is, with the tires, the Bosch, all those sub-suppliers, NVIDIA. If they've got a plant there to support BMW, they can use that to their advantage. So that's why they built in South Carolina. So that's already happened. BMW's been here for 30 years. And people don't realize that. And you start looking at the big picture of all these car companies, they're figuring it out. Believe it or not, Ford and GM are the only ones pushing back. And now that's where they asked for the 30-day hold so they could bring their tooling in and bring more production here. A little late when everyone else figured it out a few years ago.
So that's super interesting. So the tariffs in this case, so basically the unions back to tariffs.
Oh,
because
yes,
the unions in their mind, we're going to get more jobs. We're going to have more union jobs. Yeah.
Union
Wow.
jobs pay really well. If you're a union auto worker, you're making good buck. I mean, yes, you suffered through the layoffs and everything, but it's back. And that was partly under the Biden administration. What they were doing was ridiculous, and we had COVID and everything else. But they now have really good pay rates. They have excellent benefits. I mean, I'm not necessarily a pro or con for unions, but if you need a job, it's a good job. It's a
Good job.
lifetime job, and you also get retirement. I mean, they get better benefits than I do, better than you do. I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Wow. I mean, what's fascinating about this is if indeed the unions are like, tariff the hell out of them. Because A, you protect our industries in one sense.
Right.
B, you may be able to bring many of those industries back to the United States. That's assuming the tariff thing becomes a success. That is fascinating. I mean, because the reason I said it's fascinating, under normal circumstances, Democrats are the ones who get unions, workers, and those type of things.
Yeah, I don't understand what the Democrats have done. Why would they not want that?
It's that part. It's that part. Because, I had a friend of mine that was in a union training company, and he pointed out Republicans hate us, but Democrats don't do anything for us. And so we are in no man's land in the way that this operates. When the UAW, when the Teamsters, if you remember, during this last
election, they were
election,
supporting Trump.
They supported Trump. They supported Trump. I think it was like 60%. And so they didn't make an announcement this year because under normal circumstances, they effectively go for Democrats. This year, that wasn't the case. Even in the election, the majority of workers ended up going to Trump. You got the elites going to Kamala Harris. You got the rural poor going to Kamala Harris. Workers went to Trump.
It flipped.
That's a sea change.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's a sea change.
I mean, I don't cover politics like you do, but huge switch. Because I know a ton of union workers, and they're like, I'm pro-Trump because I want good pay. I want lower costs. They don't want tax on tips. They don't want tax on your auto loan. I mean, there's so many things. And that's going through in that big bill that the Democrats, I don't understand what they're doing. They're saying they want to shut down the government? Why?
They don't understand what they're doing either. I mean, that's the wild part.
They need good leadership. They need maybe it's new leadership.
They don't have it. They don't have it. And I would say the no tax on tip stuff, the thing
that's
for
big.
The tariff and the way that the workers are looking at it, Trump is making a play for workers on some of the stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong. He is going to hurt himself with, I know you may be bullish on Elon Musk. I think the American public is going to take issue with him firing all of those workers or these kind of cuts and everything else. But that stuff, look, no tax on tip, whether people realize it or not, it's a direct infusion of cash into the economy. You're effectively putting money in the hands of all of these service workers.
And they're going to spend it. They're going to spend it on stuff.
Immediately.
Utilities, bills, stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why he said he was going to, I like the idea. Maybe it's not enough, giving every single actual taxpayer $5,000. Hey, I got some things I want to buy.
Trump
I'd fix my car. I do a bunch of things. You would too, right? We're gonna go on a vacation.
Absolutely.
All that money would stay back into the economy, and that would actually be helpful. But again, Trump likes the concept. I do too, the concept. But the problem is we just don't know how many people illegally, and I'm not talking people strolling across, I'm talking about like people that really don't live in this country that are doing bad things. They could get that money too, and that wouldn't help us. So it would just be spending again. So it's an interesting concept. I know there's a
I don't know. I mean, look,
you got to think about it. But it's interesting.
I imagine that money would go to people with a social security number, as opposed to just randomly going out. And also, I hate this idea that a few people who shouldn't get it would get it, so nobody can get it. I hate that idea.
I hear you, and I think there's a lot of people who my girlfriend is struggling like you can't imagine. And whenever I see her, I always try to like take her out to lunch or do so. I don't have a lot of money, so I can't like give her a big check and pay off her house. I would if I could, believe me. And there's always we all know people like that. Like if I had the cash, I just pay off all your bills. There's a lot of people that are deserving, and unfortunately, like anything in life, one bad apple can ruin a business, ruin a friendship, ruin all this stuff, and it's frustrating because I'm with you. I'd like to see it go to people who, there's a lot of people who really could use 5,000 may not be enough because if there's this many billions and trillions of dollars of waste, that's your tax dollars. How about you just give it back to us?
You know what? That is a fascinating idea. And I heard people mention that. It's like, okay, you're saving all of this money, and what are you going to do with the money? Are you going to give it to the
Give it
American
back to
public?
us.
Please.
Don't
Yeah,
give
give it
us
back.
more libraries and more blah, blah, blah.
Give us
Fix the
cash.
roads. Fix the roads.
Right.
Tell us, you know what? Next year, you don't have to pay your taxes. Done. Do you know how much I pay in taxes? It's crazy. But, like everybody is. You look at your check at the end of the week and go, really?
It's
I think
like
we're
a third
lose-
of what
I-
you make. Yeah, it's like a
I
third.
think it's everyone. If it's not just in your check, it's when you go to the store to buy things, whether it be toilet paper or gasoline. Or, I mean, some things I understand can go for good causes. The police, the fire department, the ambulances, all that kind of utilities and things that are in your community. I'm good with that. But there's a lot of states that don't have state tax.
Mhm.
And there's countries that have no tax. So if you look at Kuwait, there is zero tax. Nothing.
because they
You
use
buy
oil.
it, you buy it. And well,
Well,
how
they
do they
use oil.
how do they pay for everything, right? I mean,
Oil.
small country. It's because
It's
they
oil.
right? Because
Yeah,
they
it's
have
oil.
investments in their own country, and they take that money and pay for all the services that are needed. We could do that on a
By the
much
way,
larger scale.
Alaska does that too, where they give Sarah Palin. I remember when Sarah Palin first came on the political scene, she had like
That was
an
a long time
80%
ago.
approval rating. Yeah, that was a long time
Wow.
ago. I'm telling my age, but she had like an
Me
80%
too.
approval rating.
I
And
didn't know.
they were like, how the hell did Sarah Palin get like an 80% approval rate? They were giving checks for the money that they were getting from oil to the various people who were in Alaska. They were giving them
Wow.
payback.
There's a benefit to live there then. It's just a
Yeah.
little cold. You think
It's
it's
just
cold
cold.
now?
It's just cold. Lauren, thank you for this. Good breakdown. I heard about so Trump did make the point about saying, well, they're putting tariffs on our stuff and we're not putting any tariffs on theirs. This is
Especially
outrageous.
China. China's the worst, unfortunately.
Well, there's going to be a pissing match between Canada and China with the U.S. before any of this gets resolved.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, I think with China, the one thing you need to watch is we are forced with these electric cars, which already I put it on my YouTube channel, which is Car Coach Reports, is right over there. On what's going on with Lee Zeldin. He's in charge of the EPA. First thing he did on day one is he created the paperwork to remove the mandate. If you want to buy an electric car, there's some great choices. I've reviewed them all on my Car Smarts channel. But if you don't want one, you shouldn't be forced into one. I mean, I was just in Florida for a week for an event, and they wanted to, of course, the rental car companies are trying to push these electric cars. And I said, no. And I'm glad I didn't. So then I started being super aware of where charging stations were. And on the property we were on, because it's an event and it wasn't Disney, there was no place to charge. And I thought, oh, I could have found myself in a bind. And it was raining like crazy. I'm not going to stand outside for 40 minutes waiting for a charge. And then I realized there's no chargers on this island we were on. I'm thinking, and I asked, I said, is there any chargers? They said, no, you have to go back onto the mainland. I'm like, I'm not doing that. And I'm glad I didn't, but I think people should have choices. So Lee Zeldin has pushed this to the floor. He's done what's called a CRA. If it passes, which means every single politician, both sides of the aisle, has to put their vote on record. So the voters will know who's helping us and who's forcing us to buy something we don't want. And the bottom line will be, once it's off the books, once it's off the legal laws, it can't go back on. That's why it's called a CRA. It's really interesting. I covered it in much more detail on my channel. Also, Sean Duffy is removing a lot of these things. It's going to take time. Also, Senator Bernie Moreno from Ohio, he's trying to get more jobs back. I had two segments on him. Very interesting what he's doing. He's a car dealer, completely different than a car manufacturer. Remember that the manufacturers are basically in bed with the government. If they say do it, they'll do it because they don't want the fines. The dealers are little independent stores that are in your hometown. So when you buy local, you're giving jobs, you're helping your local community. And when you need, jerseys for your kids' soccer team, you go to a dealer and they go, yeah, we got you. But if they don't have the cash, they can't. And so they're part of your community. So remember, they're completely different. So although some dealers are good and some are not so good, it depends where you live. And, there's other dealers in town that want your money, that want your business. Don't pay the sticker price, no matter what. That's my big tip for the day. If you're looking at a new car, you're looking at a used car, you see that price, go, I'm going to negotiate. And if they go, oh, don't leave the lot, Yeah. Just say, you know what? There's
Haggle.
another dealer down the road or in another state or in the next town down. I mean, I bought my last car out of Bethesda, Maryland, and I live in Buffalo, New York. Why? The dealer was fabulous. Picked me up at the airport, had lunch for me, had the car waiting,
Did he?
and it wasn't
Oh,
an
wow.
expensive car. It wasn't an expensive car. It was just like a normal car, but they wanted the business and they wanted me to tell my friends, hey, I got this car in Bethesda, which I just told you. So now you can go, oh, I didn't know that. So
Wait, what's the
now
name of the dealership? What's the name of the dealership?
it was it was a Hendrix dealership, but they were really good. And so little local dealers, we got a lot of little small dealers that are really good too, and they want your business. And like West Her Group here in Buffalo, New York, fantastic. You can't find a car and they're going to charge you full retail. Believe it or not, call littler towns like Buffalo. There's deals to be had, and if you're sticking with the same brand, always ask for the loyalty discount, whether it be Honda, Toyota, Audi, whatever. Ask for a loyalty discount. There could be up to $2,000, sometimes more. And if you're switching brands, you're going from Honda to Nissan, there's a conquest discount. It's the same dollar amount, but getting you over to their brand is super important. And I used to be a trainer, so I trained the dealers, so I know all the insiders. And any salesperson that goes, I don't know what you're talking about, that doesn't exist, is lying to you. Find another salesperson, ask for a sales manager, or leave the dealer. Save the money.
I have learned something today. I have definitely learned something today. That's fantastic.
I always help you guys. You know, that's what my job is. You can find me at Car Coach Reports. I'm on all forms of social media and I help everyone. I don't charge for it. I know it's stupid. That's why I don't make a lot of money, but that's not what the point is. I want to help people have car smarts. I want them to buy cars, be happy. This is a very expensive investment. House is one, cars are two, and I don't want people to be ripped off. And it really infuriates me when I hear these horror stories.
Oh, Lauren Fix. She's an auto expert, Car Coach Reports. Lauren, shout out to you. Thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You have a good one. Be safe.
You too.
Oh, Car Coach Reports. Oh, good to know. Conquest discount. And what was the other one? Same brand discount. Good to know. Good to know. Good to know. What is this? Less more. You've allowed this. Can't make this about low taxes or masses. It's not all about cutting taxes for the wealthy. Agreed. Agreed. Look, I'm not going to agree with all of my guests on this stuff. The no tax on tip stuff is going to be expensive, even though as a lefty, I guess I'm for it. I like this notion of putting money into the hands of the public. And under normal circumstances, the rich is not necessarily getting tips in that way. Give me $5,000. Again, the rich is not going to care about $5,000. That's something that all of us would care about. That's something that we care about. I mean, people still talk about the COVID money that's coming out to this day. The check was only $1,300. That gets across the level of need that is within the population. Cutting taxes on the poor, the middle class, yes. On the 1%, no. There's that. My point of view is those taxes should be raised. People like Elon Musk. And again, cutting that stuff for the government, obviously, I disagree with it. So, but she has a different take on the world on that stuff. The rich is going to land on their feet every time. Clarence Edwards, yes, right here. She's an insider. That's why her Bethesda dealership pampers. That's the other part, right? Like a car company is not going to pick me up at the airport. Pick me up at the airport. Me contact saying, hey, I see a deal. I'm not going to get picked up at the airport. They're not going to give me this massive discount. Lauren is on the inside. I agree with you. That's why she's going to get that discount. Any CEO in China will make less than 200,000. That's the other part, right? Like the reason that China can sell a car for, I don't know, $10,000, $5,000 is because their CEO is not making, $20 million a year with a bonus on top of the $20 million a year. Agreed. Agreed. Right here, I like to hear different takes on other people's worldviews, balance waves. Yeah, even if I disagree, yes, this is not an echo chamber. There will be people who I greatly disagree with, but I would bring on because they have a specific take on something. In Lauren's case, what I was interested in is not necessarily her tax policies. I don't really care about that. What I care about is this notion of how the auto industry is going to be affected by the tariffs that Donald Trump is putting out. That was the point of her. She's an auto expert. She's not a tax expert. She said it herself. I don't know anything about finance. That's not my take on the world. Fair enough. So there's no point in me having to fight with her about taxes when she's brought on about cars. In the context of the car thing, that's what I care about. How on earth are these tariffs going to affect the United States in regards to the people who are buying cars, buying parts, or any of these things? The markets are all over the place, and they are somewhat rattled by what Donald Trump is doing in regards to this tariff war. Lauren is not wrong about the notion that Canada was charging tariffs on the products that were coming or going into Canada, as opposed to no tariffs coming into the United States. I think it's a bit rich that Donald Trump claimed that this was a big, beautiful deal, and then after claiming it was a big, beautiful deal, turned around even before the deal was over with, meaning the deal expired apparently in 2026, 2027, whatever. He could have waited to negotiate then. Donald Trump is effectively breaking a deal that he effectively signed. So for me, it's a bit rich to make this argument that Donald Trump or Canada put on tariffs, and now Donald Trump wants to renegotiate the deal. Okay, well, you should have ensured that in the deal that you made that they couldn't do that. So, there's that. Either way, Donald Trump himself has pointed out that there may be a recession associated with it. In fact, I played a clip. He was having an interview, I believe, with Maria Bartiromo. And he admitted, yeah, there may be some disruption in the U.S. market over the trade war that I'm enacting around the globe.
They didn't buy any longer. Yeah, because there was nobody to call them. I used to call President Xi. I said, you got to do me a favor. You got to, live up to that agreement. And he was great. He did.
Before you came into the Oval Office the first time, you were a very successful businessman, very successful real estate executive. And a lot of people said, oh, this is the business president. This is it. He's watching the stock market. He knows all about, he doesn't want the market to go down. And now we've got tariffs and the market has been going down.
Well, not much. I mean, in all fairness.
You said, look, we're going to have a disruption, but we're okay with that. Is that what you meant? The stock market going down was the disruption? What other disruption were you alluding to?
Look, what I have to do is build a strong country. You can't really watch the stock market. If you look at China, they have a 100-year perspective. We have a quarter. We go by quarters.
That's true.
And you can't go by that. You have to do what's right. What we're doing is we're building a tremendous foundation for the future. Tremendous foundation. They didn't buy any longer. Yeah, because there was nobody to call them.
He seems to think that this tariff war is going to somehow bring jobs back to the U.S. That is what is in his mind. Now, whether that works like that in practice, who knows? Who knows? But he seems to believe that. He seems to believe that. I want to play the interview with Morandi. Shout out to him. Morandi was fantastic. He was nice enough to effectively stay with me through all of my tech issues, through all of my glitches, and everything else. I initially started this interview earlier in the show. I stopped because Mark came on at 8:15. He got the daylight savings time thing wrong. So I'm going to play this interview now in its entirety. We were laughing in the beginning of this because I initially started the interview and he didn't realize the interview had started. He said nothing different. So I don't know why he took issue with that, but whatever. Professor Morandi, we had this interview, I believe, on Sunday. Shout out to him for staying with me through my tech issues. I'll just say it that way. Everything went wrong on that day. My mic failed, the computer screwed up. I thought my mic had been damaged. I bought a new mic because I thought the mic had been damaged. Come to find out it was the computer itself that was damaged from the update. So this is being done on my cell phone. This is why it looks a little off. It doesn't look off. It just doesn't look like my normal setup. Professor Marandi having a conversation about Trump. Trump has been very bellicose in his language towards Iran, and he's been doing this kind of two-step of, well, I would like to have a deal. However, if they don't, and Iran's take is, dude, we're not negotiating with you under these terms. We're not accepting your bullying. And go further, you're not even the same United States, and we are not the same Iran from the last time you were in your presidency. You are a weaker country. You just lost a war. How are you being this bellicose towards us? Morandi goes into this and explains what seems to be a disagreement between Pezeshkian and the Ayatollah on negotiations with the United States. It's a fascinating interview, and shout out to Marandi for giving it. I'm going to play this in its entirety.
That's the problem.
If you like, he's having this fight now with Canada and Mexico.
It's not. That's the problem.
If you like, he's having this fight now with Canada.
That's actually a very good example that you gave. So
It looks like he's changing his mind on it. I get the sense of you. Like, meaning, I get Pezeshkian is saying, yes, I'm aligning. Fair enough.
okay.
We'll start the interview now. I am joined with Professor Mohammed Marandi. He is a good friend of the show. I appreciate him for joining me, especially with all the tech issues that we're having. I'm on my cell phone because I'm having tech issues. Professor, thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you for having me. Just so that your viewers know why we're laughing, you were interviewing me for the last 10, 15 minutes, but I thought we were just having a conversation. And then I realized that this was an interview, and so we just restarted.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm sorry. That's on me. The reason I put you on, so there was a clip that was floating around on Twitter where Pezeshkian, the caption of the clip was Pezeshkian is angry at the Ayatollah because he wants to effectively make a deal, whereas Ayatollah does not want to have any deals under a bullying of Donald Trump. And the clip was effectively saying that he was angry. Now, you pointed out to me that is not the context of the clip, that this is not what is taking place in this clip. So give me your take on what is going on in that clip, just so the audience will understand why you're saying that the clip is not given the correct caption in regards to what's happening.
Right. So President Pezeshkian is giving a speech to Parliament. And in Parliament, because it's a very huge hall and the MPs are always talking, the speaker always speaks loud. And so the person who doesn't speak Persian may think he's angry. They took out a small clip, and it may sound angry to someone who doesn't know what he's saying, but he's not angry. He's just giving a speech to a very large and noisy hall full of people. Then he says that I don't have the text in front of me or the Persian in front of me, but he said that I believe that we should negotiate with Americans, but when the leader said that we're not going to negotiate, I aligned myself with the leader. And that's it. And that's it. That's what he said. And that's it. And then he says, so we have to move on. In other words, we're not talking about this anymore. My words, and find solutions to our problems without negotiating with the Americans. So there's no argument, there's no anger, contrary to what some people have been claiming. There are different views. Obviously, he said himself in Parliament that his views were different from the leader. They may still be different from the leader, but he said, I'm going to align myself with the leader's position. I think this shows many things. One, it shows that contrary to what the West likes to claim, in Iran, people have very differing views. The president, the leader, other senior officials, ordinary people, media, and they express them openly. And in the West, they call that democracy and checks and balances. But when it comes to Iran, somehow there's a division within the regime and that sort of thing. So, of course, it's quite possible that the president's position has changed, because some people's positions have changed over the past few days since Trump has been making all these extraordinary statements and have so the example of NAFTA, where Trump himself brought changes to the NAFTA agreement during his previous presidency. And he then said this was a fantastic deal. Perhaps he said it's the best deal in the world because he says that a lot. And then now he imposes sanctions or tariffs, or wants to impose tariffs. He keeps fluctuating. And that's another issue, by the way. He wants to impose tariffs because it's such a horrible relationship or a horrible deal that exists between Canada and the United States, or Mexico and the United States. So if he can't abide by his own commitments, then how can Iran ever trust an American negotiator that works with him, that he'll be able to deliver, that anything that some American negotiator signs will be implemented? How could the Iranians ever believe that or have confidence in that? Or, for example, more recently, the Americans are, and other Westerners, but the Americans are guarantors for both the ceasefire in Gaza and in Lebanon, on the border between Palestine and Lebanon. Today, the Israeli regime murdered a Lebanese soldier and wounded a woman, and they murdered, the regime, its soldiers, murdered 2 Palestinians in Gaza. They've been doing that regularly for the past few months, since the ceasefire. Has the guarantor done anything about it? Of course not. The Israelis have been violating the agreement both in Gaza and in Lebanon. Are the Americans, as the guarantor, doing anything about it? Absolutely not. They continue to occupy bits and pieces of southern Lebanon. Is the guarantor going to do anything about it? Definitely not. All of these are things that the Iranians are watching. They see these happening and taking place, and they say, well, then how can we negotiate with this person? Or the deal in Gaza. If you recall, after the ceasefire, which Trump and his representative was deeply involved in bringing about the day before his inauguration, after that, he said the Palestinians must leave Gaza. In other words, the third phase is unnecessary. He helped negotiate the third phase. His representatives brought about that deal. But then days later, he says, we must ethnically cleanse Gaza. Or when he spoke about, when he threatened Hamas and said all the so-called hostages must be immediately released by Saturday or whatever.
Yeah.
Hamas and its allies are working within the framework of the deal. Trump doesn't accept the deal that he led. He was behind the negotiations. So Iran looks at all of this and says, how can we negotiate with this person? And then he threatens Iran. He says Iran has to give up its, his government says Iran has to give up its conventional weapons, its peaceful nuclear program. That's Iran's nuclear program is monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Iran is abiding by its commitments within the framework of international law. But the Americans are insisting that Iran has to forsake its rights as a sovereign country to a nuclear program. None of this is acceptable to Iran, and it's just not going to happen. So Trump is seen as constantly tearing up his own deals, and he's constantly shifting his position, and then he's making outrageous threats. What sane person would negotiate with such a person and have any realistic hope that a deal that's agreed upon will ever be implemented? And then you have Zelensky. I mean, I have no sympathy for Zelensky and the Zelensky regime. The United States, of course, created Zelensky, and now the United States is destroying him. But Trump went and humiliated him when he knows very well that Zelensky is a product of the United States. It was created by the United States. So how can anyone negotiate with the United States when a foreign leader is treated, is humiliated in front of a global audience in the White House like that. Or, for example, the King of Jordan, if you recall how he was humiliated in the White House and how he kept blinking, the King of Jordan. This sort of behavior basically leads any sane person that an agreement with the United States is almost impossible under these circumstances. Meaning almost impossible for it to be implemented.
No, that's fair. And you're right. They got rid of the JCPOA. That was another example where Trump effectively destroyed the JCPOA, despite the fact that it was a negotiated deal. And you're also right that these bullying tactics is effectively the way that Donald Trump seems to operate. He is hyperbolic, and yet he sends people in to try to make deals behind the scenes while he's on the outside being hyperbolic. I guess my thing is, though, Pezeshkian,
but sorry for interrupting, but the point is he sends people to do the negotiations, and then when the deal is signed, like in Gaza, he goes and says, no, I don't accept the deal. That's the issue. It's his deal. The ceasefire deal is his deal, basically. And then he says, no, the Palestinians must leave altogether. They have to leave Gaza completely.
So if not negotiation, then what? Because the government seemingly seems to want to negotiate. I mean, I accept everything you're saying. Everything you're saying is completely true. All of it is correct. Trump is an unreliable actor in regards to the way he engages. I want to say North Korea is different. Why do you think North Korea is different? Donald Trump with the whole Rocket Man stuff, and yet he still went over, shook his hand, etc., and stuck to, despite the pressure that he was getting in the United States about making that deal. And he also seems.
Yeah, actually, the foreign minister of North Korea had a conversation with Iranians after Trump went to the border and met the North Korean leader. And the Iranians asked the foreign minister, what was Trump like? And he said, the North Korean foreign minister, that everything was fine. But as soon as Trump left the room, when Bolton and Pompeo took over, they wrecked everything. So whether it's like with Gaza, where his negotiators do a deal and then Trump rejects it, or whether it's Trump doing negotiations and the people working for him reject it, it doesn't matter. The point is that Trump is seen as someone who can't be trusted, someone who we cannot negotiate with, someone who is not a reliable person to deal with. That the only route left for Iran. I mean, again, I don't know if President Pezeshkian still believes that we should negotiate, but he said publicly that I align myself with the leader. This discussion is over. That's basically what President Pezeshkian was saying, and that's why we no longer have this public debate, because he has aligned himself with the leader. So I don't know if he still believes in negotiations, especially because, as I said, after the last few days have been really, has put Trump in a much more negative light, even than before. But at the end, regardless of who believes in negotiations and who doesn't, Iran is not going to negotiate. Iran is going to deal with other countries, all other countries except for the Israeli regime and the United States. Of course, Iran will continue to, their messages continue to go back and forth between Iran and the United States. That has always happened and will continue to happen. At least that's what's going on now. That hasn't changed. They send messages through different parties, and the Iranians respond. That won't change, as far as I know. But Iran's policy will be to continue expanding ties with the global south, or the global majority, as many now call it, Russia, China, neighboring countries, Central Asia countries, and so on, BRICS, and so on. And Iran will wait until it feels that the United States has changed its, what would be the best word, has changed its attitude, has fundamentally changed its attitude. Until then, there won't be negotiations. So either at some point, Trump is going to have to change his attitude completely and treat Iran with respect and withdraw unreasonable demands and show or prove that a deal that is signed by the United States will be respected. If that one day happens, hypothetically, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, then I presume that Iran would be willing to negotiate. But until that happens, I do not see negotiations taking place.
If not negotiations, what do you see taking place moving on from here? Meaning, if negotiations are off the table, and Ayatollah said, he said flat out, we are not going to accept negotiations under threat of bullying.
It's going to be business as usual. We'll continue to be doing what we're doing now. Maybe there'll be new opportunities in Europe because of the divisions between Europe and the United States. That remains to be seen. But Iran will continue expanding relations with countries across the global south. And I should add that Trump, this administration is not the administration that came to power 8 years ago. The United States is not as strong as it was back then. And other countries are more assertive than they were back then. Iran is more assertive now. Russia, more assertive. And China, more assertive. 8 years ago, we saw the Chinese showing great flexibility. Now, that's not really the case. And part of it is because the Americans have imposed so many sanctions and tariffs that they've lost most of their leverage against China. And the Chinese know that the Americans are not going to stop. So that has actually been an incentive for China to improve relations with Iran and other countries, because they know that the door to better relations with the United States is shut. The same is true with Russia. Even though the Russians and the Americans are now talking, Trump keeps saying different things. Every day you hear a different sort of statement coming from Trump. And it's not clear. I mean, the negotiations will continue, and ultimately there may be some sort of peace deal in Ukraine, but it's not going to be that simple. And I don't think that the Russians are going to put any eggs in Trump's basket, or at least they're not going to take any eggs out of the Iranian or Chinese basket and put it in the Trump basket, because they know that Trump is not trustworthy, it's not reliable. And even if he was, who's to say that when he leaves power, the next president will not overturn everything? That's how the United States has become.
That's the rub. I mean, because for the speed that Donald Trump went in order to try to make deals with Russia and kind of unravel, that speed could also be used again with the next president to unravel.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you this.
And the divisions in the United States are deep.
Yeah.
And what Trump is now doing to his enemies is far more painful to them inside the United States, that the so-called deep state, or the opposition, is far more painful to them than what he did 8 years ago. This time around, he's hitting them hard, and where it hurts, financially, USAID, NED, and so on, and the list goes on. So these people will be seeking revenge, and Iran sees that. So, and others see that. So they're saying, well, how do we know who's going to be in charge 4 years from now? And again, as you point out, Who's to say that they're not going to reverse all of what's happened with the same speed as Trump made these changes over the last few weeks?
Can you tell me the security agreements between Russia and Iran? What is that relationship? Because there was a conversation that Trump wanted to use Russia to make negotiations with Iran. Basically, once he solidifies whatever kind of relationship he has with Russia, to use that relationship as a way to kind of make some kind of agreement, I guess in a back channel way, with Iran. Give me your thoughts on that. And I guess just to put a final point on it, the security agreements between Iran and Russia, this was something that they signed, I believe it was several months ago. What does it entail?
Actually, it was quite recent. It was right before Trump came to power. But the agreement has been discussed and negotiated for a very long time. It's a very comprehensive deal. It includes everything: military, political cooperation, most importantly, in my opinion, economic cooperation, the North-South corridor, gas and oil cooperation. Both countries have huge oil and gas reserves. Russia is #1 in the world with regards to natural gas. Iran is #2. And then right between them, there lies Turkmenistan, which has huge gas reserves too. So, and then Russian grains can be exported through Iran. Iran could be a hub for gas, for oil, for wheat, for grains. And then Iran, of course, would have access to the Russian market and Europe later on. When there is peace, then the North-South corridor would be a much better route for trade between Europe and Asia than the other corridors. So, or at least parts of Europe. So that, I think, makes it a very important agreement.
Right.
But with regards to using Russia to negotiate, no, I don't see that happening at all. The Americans may want to send a message to Iran through Russia. That's fine. They do that through other people too. If you recall, the former Japanese Prime Minister Abe, when he came to Iran with Trump's message, and the leader refused to take it, and Abe put it under him. He hid it under his leg during his talks with the leader. He refused to take the deal. But the point is that Trump and others do send messages to Iran through different means. But if it is like, if the Americans want the Russians to negotiate on Iran's behalf or anything like that, that's not going to happen. I don't think the Russians have such expectations at all, and Iran will not do such a thing because Iran will always be able to negotiate for itself.
Interesting. That is so interesting. Wow. Okay. I think we've covered it. I mean, you've made the point. I'm curious, one last thing. What are the messages that they are sending back channel?
Well,
I mean, you made that. But I'm just curious.
I wouldn't be interviewed. I'd be in these, behind the scenes. I don't know what the messages are, but from what we're hearing in the public discourse, Trump's messages have, or what we've heard from Trump himself, that he sent a message to Iran. They're aggressive. They have their unreasonable expectations. The demands violate Iran's sovereignty, and therefore Trump has basically forced Iran to shut the door, and that door will remain shut until someone on the other side is seen as behaving reasonably and who is capable of doing a deal and implementing it. We already have a bad history with the United States. Whenever we dealt with the United States, they violated the agreements from the 1980s onwards, and from the beginning of the revolution onwards. And the most famous instance was the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, where as soon as it was signed, Obama began to violate the deal. And then ultimately, Trump tore up the deal. And after Trump tore up the deal, Iran continued to abide by the deal for a full year in full, all of its obligations, whereas the Americans and the Europeans were violating all of their obligations. And then only after a year did Iran begin to halt implementation in stages, which that took another year. So whenever the Europeans or the Americans complain about Iran violating the nuclear deal, I think you should expect the Iranians to roll their eyes and smirk, probably.
Recession knew that. Like everything you just said, he knew it. In fact, I would say everything that we've talked about in this interview, he knows, and yet he was still, meaning, take out Trump for a moment. Even with Trump not being there, the United States was not an honest actor in any of these negotiations. I mean, we pulled out of all the nuclear agreements with Russia, we destroyed the Minsk agreements, we blew off the Istanbul agreements, as you pointed out, the JCPOA. Donald Trump has blown off every trade deal that he's made with Mexico and China. Possession knew that already. So what was his motivation to try to make a deal with the United States if indeed there was this level of distrust in the relationship?
I don't know. I'm not like in his inner circle. I would assume that he was probably saying, well, let's give it a try. Yep. But I think the logic that those given by those who oppose negotiations. Now, there's some who just oppose negotiations, and I don't mean them. There are a certain group of Iranians who will always refrain from negotiations. That's not the position of the leader, because he has allowed negotiations to take place in the past. What he's doing now is saying no negotiations now, because he wants to teach the Americans that they have to change. They have to change their mentality. They have to change their behavior. So I think the leader is saying no. Negotiating under these circumstances will be too costly. It will be a waste of time. It will have a negative influence on Iranian markets. The markets will go just like what Trump does with the U.S. markets nowadays. One day there's going to be sanctions, the next day there are no sanctions. The stock market falls, then it goes back up, and God knows why he does this. A lot of people think that they're making a lot of money this way because people sell their stocks, and then right before Trump backs up. Yeah, who knows? Who knows why he does this? But
he's trying to back to the U.S. and he believes that tariffs is one of the ways to do it. Basically, if he makes it so costly for people to do business outside of the United States, so they're bringing their companies back into the U.S., this is not going to work.
Yeah, like global. Of course. I mean, one of those companies that's going to be hit hardest, for example, is General Motors. Yes. But in any case, which is an American company. But the point is that the leader and others who believe that we shouldn't negotiate now, what they're saying is that this is only going to have a negative impact on Iranian markets, on the Iranian economy, and it's just going to create false expectations, and then those expectations will be crushed, and then that will just hurt Iran. So no negotiations until the Americans come to their senses.
By the way, Russia had to go through the same thing. Like the only reason Donald Trump is having negotiations with Russia is because Russia beat him on the battlefield.
Exactly. And right now, Americans, they don't feel, or at least they say that, because there is this false narrative. This is something new about Russia. For 3 years, everyone's been saying in the West, not you and not me, not people who we speak with. We've always been saying that they will not defeat Russia and that Russia will win. We've been saying this since day one. During the nuclear negotiations, the war began, I was in Vienna. And I was telling Western elites and diplomats to do a deal with Iran because your economies are going to get very bad because of the sanctions against Russia. And they were all saying, no, we'll defeat Russia in a few weeks. Russia's going to be crushed. Putin's going to be overthrown. And I kept saying, that's just not going to happen. You haven't been able to overthrow Cuba. You haven't been able to overthrow Venezuela. How are you going to overthrow Russia? How are you going to overthrow Iran? But that mentality existed for almost 3 years. And now, since it's become very clear that Russia has won the war, Trump has no option but to retreat. And he can blame it on the previous regime. Anyone who looks carefully would see that Trump, when he was president for a year, during the previous Trump administration, that he was pursuing the same policies as Obama and Biden. He didn't slow down the move towards confrontation with Russia. But in any case, he can blame Biden and pull back and talk about, taking Greenland or Canada or whatever, so that to distract people away from the weakness that exists and the defeat that we see in Ukraine. So now is the right time for Russia to negotiate because they're in a position of strength. The Americans, I think they have to first recognize that they have to come to that recognition that no, they're not winning against Iran. They're not winning against the axis of resistance. This is the same nonsense that they've been saying about Russia for the past 3 years. And as long as the Americans and the West have that silly assumption, negotiations are not going to bear fruit because.
All right, I'm going to end the interview on that because shortly after that, the interview goes haywire because my phone effectively died. Professor Morandi, shout out to him. Thank him for that. Like I said, he was very patient with all of the glitches and everything else that took place. So I'm going to end this show. I want to go to my chat first. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, bigoted. You know my saying on this. Garland Nixon, send me a link. I can come on until you get marked. To give context to that tweet, because if you're just joining, you may think, what the hell is Garland talking about? Daylight savings time broke the connectivity that we typically have with guests who are abroad, because not every country has daylight savings time. Mark ends up coming on late, and so Mark didn't come on for the 7 o'clock hour in the way that Mark was supposed to. And so it happens every year. It just kind of is what it is. He eventually came on at 8 o'clock, but Garland came on at 7 o'clock to help out. Shout out to him. Garland is awesome. Garland and I, by the way, are going to have a show this evening at 4 p.m. We are trying to do this more often. The audience seems to really enjoy us doing the show together. So at 4 p.m. today, Garland and I will be doing a show. Fuzzy Balls, that name is hilarious. Does Trump know that Ukraine already signed off all the natural resources to the UK as part of the 100-year guarantee agreement? That is a good question. And look, a lot of people were kind of making a point of saying, well, the UK has already done the deal. So what minerals are he going to get, considering UK has signed a 100-year deal with Ukraine? I have no idea. I mean, I'm assuming they know. I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't know. And so I don't know. I mean, part of what the UK wanted was effectively a backstop. The UK is providing security guarantees, which is funny to me, considering they are begging the United States for security guarantees. So I don't know. I'm assuming they know. I don't know how they would know at this point that Ukraine signed a 100-year deal. Who the hell signs a 100-year deal with a country that they don't even know if it's going to exist at the end of this, let alone what it's going to look like in 100 years? But whatever. The UK is a failing country. So what? They can sign deals with whoever they want. I have no idea if Trump knows. I'm assuming he does. Fuzzy, I hope he does. Mr. Ripley, the cultural damage that has followed Greater Israel Project is going to do to us will dwarf the damage done by Vietnam. We have isolated ourselves by working with a terrorist state that is committing a genocide. We are working with them on this. It's a bit rich. for all of these people who are screaming about Ukraine while simultaneously supporting a genocide in Israel and a ethnic cleansing in Syria. Ethnic cleansing in Syria. Mr. Ripley, you're absolutely right. Alexander G, keep spreading the truth, buddy. I try. At the very least, what I think is true. Call Son Poppy. Thank you, Call Son Poppy. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to end this. The show is going very long. I want to thank all of you for joining me. We had a damn good crowd today. We had got up to over 700 and something watching. The show is growing. I appreciate all of you for helping the show grow and be what the show is. Yeah, I just say thank you. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, signing off. You guys have a phenomenal day. I'll see you later this evening at 4 p.m. with the one and only Garland Nixon. You all have a good one.